Welcome everybody to the lock-in. It's Friday. It's 4 o'clock Pacific time, 7 o'clock Eastern, and it's midnight in Ireland. Cheers to you wherever you are. Let me know what's in your glass. We're in for a good night tonight. Comedians, crack, history, whiskey as usual. But as always, the lock-in is our chance to virtually connect in a world where it's increasingly more difficult to connect in person. So I'm delighted that we get to do this every week. I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces tuning in every week. So let me know where you are, what you're drinking. I'll be bringing my special guests in a few minutes. And we're going to be sipping on, I'm going to be cracking open 3 different whiskies tonight. The lads have brought a few whiskies of their own, which we'll talk about as well. But do let me know where you're tuning in from and what's in your glass. Paul Andrew Thornton, quick out of the gate there, over in London, aren't you, Paul? You got some whiskey in your glass, no doubt. Maybe a drop of the story, perhaps. Hope you've all had a good week. Hope you're safe. Hope you're well. Mark Ashley's got his Sexton ready already. He's sipping on it in Daytona in Florida. Good man, Mark. Writer's Tears, Redhead tonight for Paul. Good man. Michael, welcome, Michael. Michael Mullen. He's got Waterford Single Farm in his glass. Joining us from Glasgow. Fair play to you. I'm trying 2 whiskies tonight that I've never tried before. One of them is the Busker Irish whiskey, a blended Irish whiskey from the Royal Oak Distillery, which I'll be sipping on first tonight. And the second one that I've never tried before is the legendary Silkie from Sleeve League Distillers, which I'll be opening probably at the end of the evening because it's slightly peated and I don't want to ruin my palate. The other whiskey we'll be tasting tonight is the Sexton. We've had this before on the show. We're having it again tonight. There's a few good stories behind this too, which we can talk about. Kelly is joining us from Beaver Creek, Ohio. She's starting with the Sexton. Great stuff. Liam Brogan from Ireland Craft Beverages and 2 Stacks Irish whiskey. Good man. Drinking Killowen, 10-year-old bonded experimental series. Oh, the Virgin Hungarian Oak. That's a lovely one. Janique, who is a big fan of Shite Talk, the Irish History podcast, is joining us in California. Fair play to you. Janique, for tuning in. Johnny's got his Johnny's Lane, Powers Johnny's Lane in Long Beach, New York. Good man. The Bronx. Damien's joining us in the Bronx, sipping on Tullamore Dew cider cask. Lovely stuff. Oh, and Jeff's got some Silkie as well, but he's got the dark Silkie. I have that in the cupboard behind me, which is the darker, more heavily peated version of the legendary Silkie. Peter says, congratulations on a fabulous week for Stories and Sips. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, we were delighted this week to be awarded Icon of Whiskey Award from Whiskey Magazine in London for Communicator of the Year, which was fantastic. So we're thrilled with that. And thanks, everyone, for your support. And sure, look, it's only that we turn up here every Friday and we talk about whiskey and drink it that we got noticed, I suppose. But it's brilliant. And it's a nice little thing for us to have. So thank you for that. JJ is joining us in Las Vegas with a glass of Powers 3 Swallow. Lovely stuff. Maybe the best, one of the best value single pot still whiskies on the market. Jean is in Las Vegas as well, trying to decide what to drink. Well, Irish whiskey first of all, and if you need any more help, I know there'll be 100 people here willing to give you a quick answer out of the gate, I'd say. Stacey's got her pour of the Busker ready to go as well. Fair play to you all for following along. Good stuff. And Frank has got a Dingle pot still in Jupiter, Florida. Great stuff. So I'll be coming back and looking at what you're drinking. Keep me posted. Oh, Chris has got a little bit of the Gale in his Stories and Sips glass tonight. Good man, up in Michigan. Fair play to you. Geez, you've the whole Irish whiskey map covered with what you're drinking tonight. Tonight is about, I think tonight's going to be the most representative of a lock-in, a true Irish lock-in we've had in a while, because we are literally going to be locked in talking shite for a few hours. And that's what happens when you get locked into a pub. And sometimes, you'd be stuck in the lock-in and you wouldn't know who you'd be sat next to. And they'd start telling you stories. And before you know it, you're falling around the place laughing because you'd never heard the likes of them. That's the goal tonight. There's tremendously funny stories and historical tales related to Irish whiskey and Irish history, of course. And my 2 guests from Shite Talk, the Irish History podcast, are going to join us now in just a couple of minutes. And we're going to talk shite and they're going to explain the name of the podcast, where it comes from, and talk a little bit about that before we sip on our whiskies and tell you some great stories from the annals of history related to Irish whiskey. So it's going to be a bit of crack. This is one of those nights where you make sure you got a full bottle beside you and don't leave the chair. Put the phone on silent and make sure all feral children and pets are put outside the house for fear that they'll bother you while you listen into the crack tonight. Donal is joining us from Chicago. Good man, Donal, one of the founders of Glendalough. He's drinking his Glendalough 7-year porter cask single malt. Give you a little plug there. Good man, Donal. Donal and I were talking during the week about doing some things with Glendalough, which we might share more with you very soon. And Tim Murphy, buddy there from Cove in County Cork, joining in, staying up late for the lock-in as he does every week. Good man, Tim. I grew up around the corner from Tim. Johnny's got more than one bottle standing by. All right, so listen, you're here for the lock-in. So many of you tune in every single week, which is an absolute gift to me and just a joy to me that you do. I'm thrilled with the company. I'm thrilled that we get to sip whiskeys together. And we keep talking every week about how next week we'll do this in person. Next week we'll do this in person. The world hasn't played ball with us yet, but we are going to aim for that very, very soon. But in the meantime, you're very welcome to the lock-in. And I'm going to be back in a second with my 2 very special guests who are going to join me for a night of crack. Yes, in this house we drink Irish whiskey, and in your house you drink Irish whiskey too. So throw out that bourbon and that Scotch and that Japanese whiskey and make space for Irish whiskey. Let me bring in my 2 special guests all the way from, well, different parts of the world tonight. Jason and Kevin from Shite Talk, you are most welcome.
Thanks for having us on, Barry.
Thanks very much, Barry. That was a hell of an intro.
Jeez, one hell of an intro, wasn't it? That took about, 7 minutes of an intro. Just like the introduction to an Academy Award.
And we played off slowly enough.
Yeah, we'll start playing the music, start cutting off stage.
Yeah.
I have my countdown clock ready to go, so if you see it counting down, just get ready to leave.
We just have a couple of more thank yous to do before we get kicked off.
And now on to the liars.
A couple of scores to settle before I get kicked out here.
Jason and Kevin, you're joining us you're from different parts of the world, but you unite together weekly for what I have found to be one of the most entertaining, hilarious, bizarre podcasts that have connected me back to Ireland in a very meaningful way, and it's called Shite Talk. Would either of you care to explain how that came about and what even the name of it means for our American audience?
I think I'll let Kev take that one.
I was going to give it to you. I think, to be honest, I've never listened to the show, so I wouldn't know. But I think if you go back and listen to, we've been doing the show for about 1.5 years now. If you go and listen to the early episodes, there's no mention made to the name of the podcast because we hadn't decided on a name. We recorded 10 episodes before we figured out what the name was because we couldn't decide on it. So we figured we may as well just start going. So in those early episodes, there's just a lot of references to the podcast or a podcast. But here, it's kind of what you were talking about, Barry. Like Shite Talk is the sort of thing you'd hear at a lock-in where someone's just... I think we've had a lot of trouble with this when it comes to American algorithms. Facebook doesn't like it. Instagram doesn't like it. Shite is not the same as shit. If you're shit talking in America, I think you're talking down to someone. You're talking smack about someone. Shite Talk is just when you're rambling on about something that you may or may not be qualified to talk about, but you're giving it with enough confidence that the person on the receiving end of it thinks that you know what you're talking about. I think, is that a fair...
uniquely Irish trait, yeah.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you said may or may not when it's 100% definitely not.
Yeah. But see, that's part of the charm. You got to pretend at this stage that it's may or may not. Basically, if you've ever talked to any Irish man ever in a bar after about 10:30, you know what Shite Talk is. You might not know it yet, but you've heard it.
And you filled a gap, haven't you? Because in the absence of us being able to go into a bar and hear live Shite Talk by just pulling out a stool and sitting next to the owl fella with the paddy hat on him, we now can tune in instead to ye lads and listen to ye talking about it without even having to pay for a pint.
Yeah.
True. Well, in fairness, we are drinking on it. So in future, like if people would like to send in whiskey or beers to us complimentary, we will be more than thankful to drink them live on the show.
We could accommodate that. Yeah.
I like that we're 9 minutes in and you're already soliciting free whiskeys through my live stream. So thanks for the grift. I appreciate that.
Actually, you know yourself, you let a man from Carlow and a man from Dundalk onto your show, it's just going to be like looking for handouts within about 10 minutes.
So the man with the Irish flag behind him, Jason, your background belies your location because you're not in Ireland at all, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm down in Austin, Texas, the blue dot in the red state. It's I've been over here for about, what is it now? September 2019. I lived here in 2015-16 for a bit as well. They can't keep me away.
Just fair play to you.
Yeah, no, I love it here. The weather is great. We're semi-open. We're not in full lockdown, so it's kind of, the longer I can stay here, the better. I'll tell you, the flag isn't obviously. I'm in my office now. I had to put that up just for the podcast. They don't usually let me just have this around. I can't be such a stereotype that I have a giant flag and then just whisk bottles of whiskey hanging around my desk.
I have a good vision of you walking into any room for a meeting and furled up in your pocket is the Irish flag. And before it starts, you have to pin it to the wall before the meeting's allowed to progress.
Pretty much an Irish flag in one pocket and then a bunch of those small little baby whiskeys in the other. And I'm ready to go.
Kevin, you're not in Austin, Texas at all, of course.
No, I was going to say for the rest of the week, Jason's office has it flipped upside down for the Ivory Coast.
Cote d'Ivoire, Kevin. Cote d'Ivoire,
of course. Yes, yeah.
That's the PC term.
Yeah. No, I'm in sunny South Dublin now at the minute. I'm living in Inchicore for the last year, which is it's great. We've been in lockdown for the last couple of weeks or couple of months. I've lost track of it at this stage, but we're due for a snowstorm. Apparently, there's going to be a blizzard hitting us tomorrow, which is something to look forward to. We've been locked inside because of COVID. Now we'll be locked inside because of snow. Just changing it up a bit.
The Irish wouldn't be used to that much snow now. Like a blizzard would be a big word in Ireland. Like
yes, no, yeah. In fairness, like I guess if any of your listeners in the States are picturing a blizzard, it's not that. It's about I don't know. It's snow up to your ankles. There's no part of your foot. A dusting of snow. Enough snow to shut down the country. It kind of happens in cycles where like it'll snow like a tiny fraction and shut the country down, and then the government will invest in salt and like measures to combat the snow for the next year, and then it won't snow for 3 years, and people will give out stink about them spending money on salt, so they stop, and then there's a big blizzard, and then people give out stink because they haven't spent money on salt. It's been like that, I suppose, for the last 10 years. But
they'll store those snow blowers in beside voting machines and pay a lot of money to have them kept there for many years. Yeah.
Bought off someone's cousin who swears they're the latest new technology. And then,
Which is usually about once every 70 years, I find. That's when we get the big snow. Because usually there's one big snow per decade. Like I remember 2 of them. I remember when I was in secondary school, and then I remember being old enough to drink in Dublin, and when they were like a red warning, they're everyone stay inside, don't go out. But Jimmy Rabbits is open down on Camden Street, so I mean they've got a fire.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're in 3 different parts of the world, but we're kind of virtually united tonight in the virtual pub, like locked in. Kevin, you're already cracking into the whiskey. I haven't poured anything yet, and Jason, you've got a whiskey as well. What are you drinking?
Well, so I decided to represent Carlow anyway, and Walsh's distillery. I'm getting the camera all wrong. Writer's Tears, just the regular copper pot one, and then I went for the sake of the podcast. I got the Sexton, so that we at least between me and myself and Kev would have one person who could talk about one of the things we were meant to talk about.
Good man, fair play to you. And Kevin. Kevin did a wonderful magic trick earlier of showing us a tin of Green Spot.
Yes, which is only about, well, I'd say generously, it's half full. It's about a quarter of it left. That's the remnants of a Christmas present.
It was full when we started talking earlier.
Well, listen, Christmas comes at different times in different parts of the country. But, it's all right for you 2 lads. I think it's about, 5, 6 in the afternoon for you. It's now gone about 1:15 midnight here. So I'll need a bit of Green Spot for this. But
Irish coffee. Time to crack out the coffee.
Yeah. Well, I'd intended on representing a bit of local as well by picking up some. I was going to either get some Teelings, which is, well, I think it was distilled in Cooley at some stage, or Slane whiskey, but I left it too late. But I got some Tullamore Dew from the local shop there this evening. So between that
Great.
and the remnants of the green spot, I think I'll be set.
Well, at least you're representing the local shop, so we've got that covered, which is important.
A little boutique known as Spar, SPAR. A fine little corner store.
Well, listen, Sláinte, cheers to the two of you lads. Thanks a million for joining us. We'll have a bit of crack tonight. Get that into you. Before we get started, I want to show folks a little bit about this Busker. So this is relatively new to the Irish or to the American market, and it does come from Carlow, from that distillery that was formerly owned by Walsh. Walsh, of course, the brand most famously known for two Irish whiskies, Writer's Tears and The Irishman, not to be confused with the movie, with the series. What is it, a movie or a series?
It's a movie that's about the length of the series.
It's a season one.
Yeah.
Was it 4 hours? I'd say, like, you get through a bottle of The Irishman quicker than you would the movie.
Yeah.
This has just become available in Ireland. I think it's starting to appear on shelves in Ireland, but it's widely available here in the US and will increasingly be available. I put up a picture here with the details of it. This one is one of 4 whiskies in the range. So what's unique about the Royal Oak Distillery, formerly known as the Walsh Distillery, is that they produce all 3 styles of Irish whiskey. They produce single grain whiskey, single malt whiskey, single pot still whiskey, and they've released a range with all 3 of those whiskies, and then a 4th whiskey, which is the blend, which is a blend of all 3 of those. So that's what I'm drinking tonight. It's a blend of single grain and then high percentages of single malt and single pot still. And then it's actually matured in 3 different casks: bourbon, ex-bourbon, ex-sherry, and ex-marsala. So it's my first time tasting it. So as I sip on this, I'll kind of weigh in on my thoughts on it. But very, very affordable, under $30 for a bottle. And it's young. These are young whiskies. These are just, I think, 4 years old, maybe, if that. So they've a way to go, but great value to be able to get into all different styles of Irish whiskey at the one time. So that's what I'm starting with anyway. So let me see. Royal Oak. Let me see. Jen says Royal Oak and Tullamore Dew do all 3 whiskies. Yeah, they do, as do, who else? Great Northern Distillery do all 3, I believe, as well, of all 3 styles. But and there's one more, yeah. And Tullamore Dew historically has sourced all of their whiskey from Middleton and from Bushmills, and they're starting to use their own whiskey now as their new distillery comes online. So I'll be sipping on this to begin with and give you my thoughts. But yeah, so when I reached out to you lads, I said, listen, I love the history, I love the Shite Talk around it, and we touch on some of that history with the whiskey side of things, and there's surely some kind of collaboration or forced coming together that could be turned into a bit of decent chat of a Friday night regarding Irish whiskey history. And you said, Jesus, we'll go out and we'll find some stories. And by God, you did.
We'll get something sorted.
Jeez, you got something sorted, right?
We're getting kind of good at throwing those stuff together in the space of like a day and a half. It used to take us kind of, take a week or 2 to research. And now it's like, to have a drink, go on the internet, Wikipedia rabbit hole, off we go.
It's because we know so much at this stage, Jason. We're
well, that's it. All the knowledge is up there. We just don't know it yet.
No.
You've covered some Irish whiskey stories yourselves through the podcast, making a portion of tonight extremely easy and non-laborious for you, and you're welcome. But didn't you start off the podcast like with your first ever episode was Irish whiskey related, wasn't it? In a way,
it was, yeah, we did with John L. Sullivan, he's the last heavyweight bare knuckle boxing champ. He was the son of 2 Irish immigrants that had moved over to Boston, obviously. And then that story, I guess, turned into a quick Kevin. I think Kevin did a podcast I only found out the other week before Shite Talk that was pretty much Shite Talk under a different name, and he waited until 5 seasons in to let me know that. But I've seemingly replaced his old friend Enda. But
at what stage do you tell your current girlfriend about your ex-girlfriends? I mean, listen, it seemed like the right time to bring it out.
Yeah, no, it's fair, I suppose. But the first episode we'd got, we were in Whelan's, or no, the Burke's, the attachment to Whelan's, a great pub. But the we saw the prize fighter and we were drinking that, and they have the story in the back of it, so it seemed a very apt first episode. It was going to be us talking shite while drinking whiskey. We didn't drink that whiskey. We drank whatever we had on at the time. We should have, with some foresight and planning, we probably should have got a bottle of it. But no, we just kind of started cracking away with we had one microphone and we were both crouched over, looking over into hotel rooms in Smithfield. It was very odd. It was
in rooms with very high ceilings, very echoey sound going around it. But I think, so the first one was about Sullivan, who I think, was he recognized as like the first heavyweight prize fighter?
The last, I believe, and probably seen as maybe the best ever. He was training to be a priest at one point, but like most Irishmen, there he is now. Yeah, he is that guy that you always see, kind of like, the early 1900s strong man in shape, two hands up like this. Kind of the McGregor style. But
it became a meme for a while, I think.
Oh, I'd missed that now. But yeah, no, so he ended up, he liked the alcohol too much to become a priest. Maybe he was only going into the priesthood for the wine, we're not sure. But
they give you bread and wine once a week. I mean,
good to go. Well, depending on how many masses you do, Kev, you could probably, if you could double up each day.
Of course.
We're all pictures back in the day of fellas like that. Like, how come they all looked like they were about 65 when they were probably about 20?
Yes, yeah. Well, sure, that man probably had 17 children and a birth hernia at that stage, and had been spending the last 3 weeks lifting steel girders on the shoulder. I just like the idea that he walked straight in and was like, I'll just throw my top off over there. He probably didn't even wear a top to the photo shoot.
I don't think he owned one.
No, probably not.
It was just, he would,
it was
calling card. Instead of wearing a t-shirt that everyone always knows, that's him because he always wears that. Just don't wear anything, and then that'll be even more recognizable.
But I suppose back then, sorry, go on, Barry.
Well, I heard he was known as No Shirt Sullivan. Like, he couldn't get into any restaurant or bar. They'd be constantly saying, "Lad, would you ever put on an old shirt?"
He's actually,
to your point, he owned one.
He's the origin of the famous phrase, "I'll fight you for the shirt on your back." He was actually the first man to lose that bet, and was forevermore scarred. Never quite sure on. But back then, you couldn't just take 17 selfies on the back of a phone and it meant nothing. This was a probably 3-day ordeal. You had to stand in that pose for about 16 hours while they burnt the phosphorus. So you needed to make it count, I suppose. You didn't want to faff around with ones where you're wearing a shirt. Be a waste of time.
So he was the son of Irish immigrants, and he wasn't Irish himself, although by birth, his kind of parents. Like,
see, now I'll tell you, Barry, that that's a contentious issue for our listenership on Reddit. Yeah. And that's we don't delve into that too much. As far as I'm concerned, everyone's Irish. Anyone who wants to listen to our podcast or donate money to our Buy Me a Coffee website, they're as Irish as they were as me.
Here comes the grift again. Here's the grift. Jeez, it'll be four times an hour.
That is, I think Jason seems to be implying there that you can buy Irish nationalhood from us, which we are actually. We've been licensed to do by President Michael D. Higgins. And
the church.
The church, of course. It's sort of joint venture. But
we'll put up your PayPal there shortly, and you can sell your citizenships at leisure, and I'll absolve myself of any legal liability.
Of course. Well, there's two options. There's the straightforward, just buying a green card, and then there's the sort of elite tier where you can marry Jason Brennan for the
that is
whatever
for a once-off payment.
Yes, for the low installments. But that's the prize fighting whiskey. Then
that's the one you saw, and you looked at the back of it, and you thought, "Jez, there's a great old story here. We should tell that."
Yes, the back of that is pretty much the script for that first episode we did.
What did you find out about him? Like, was he any good at boxing?
Oh, he was amazing. He was. He would walk into places and just. I suppose I think he got his first fight to getting up on stage to fight a man who would say he'd take all comers. He was known as a big boxer, and Sully knocked 7 shades into him. So so he kind of went on a tour basically all around America, but also then Ireland. He would just travel over. He was a big man for the alcohol at the time, which I suppose Irish people, but he would fight drunk for the most part. He had a concoction that he would drink in between rounds that was like whiskey
and tea
and some coffee. It was just a champagne. Sometimes he would just have a big like no water, just like alcohol. I need to like dull the senses and then just get more aggressive. So just straight whiskey.
He'd be fighting for like it was like several hours. They'd just be. It was pugilism, so it wasn't like boxing like we know it. It was just standing in a ring for literal fencing. 4 or 5 hours on end and just getting thumped in the face.
Yeah, a round would start or end any time that someone was knocked down. So then there's no idea of the referee stepping in going, okay, no, he's out of it now. It's just, no, so he got knocked down, so we'll give him a couple of seconds or 20 minutes to get ready, and then he'll come back in and fight again.
He got knocked down. He's get it up again. I'm going to have to change location here because it's late at night for me. I'm going to move around. But I'll be back on in about a minute. Jason, maybe you want to talk about we just finished doing some research on like other styles of Irish fighting. The Irish invented the MMA.
You go move your room there, and James Brannigan is telling us that he was stopped at the National Library in Dublin, and the security man was named John L. Sullivan, and he may have well been the exact same man.
I wouldn't mess with that security man. No, if you get a smell of whiskey off the breath, it's definitely him.
Did you ever hear in your research of boxers and Irish boxers, also in the Venn diagram of Irish boxing and alcohol, did you ever come across a fella called Jack Doyle from Cove, famous boxer?
I don't think so. No.
He would have been like a Hollywood star back in the 1930s, and he was he had hands like shovels, and he was in the British Army when he was young, and he was loading bags onto ships, onto passenger ships, liners in Cove when he was a young fella. But he was like 6'6" and built like a brick outhouse. And he would
pull him up here on Wikipedia. Jesus, he's massive. I didn't know he made men that big.
No, jizz. He was an unusual fella, and he became a Hollywood star. He was in movies in the 1930s in Hollywood. He married a Hollywood starlet. He sold out Carnegie Hall singing as a singer. Like, he was that classic Irish 3-for-1 kind of a thing. Jizz, he deserves an episode of his own.
This is great because Kevin can't hear or see this, and usually I am the one who brings, like I train MMA and some boxing, so like I'm the one who brings all of the fighting episodes, if anyone's ever wondering. Usually all the sport episodes as well. I was a former sports journalist, so I'm going to have to go research that now, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have season 6. We'll have at least one episode there on Jack Doyle.
Jesus, give me a shout if you do. I have loads of info on him. So you were diving in anyway to John L. Sullivan and finding all kinds of stories about him, like.
Yeah, pretty much. It's one of those, like with the podcast itself, it's the name's fairly apt because we're comedians first. Both myself and Kev are both stand-ups. We decided to do the podcast as a way to kind of every comedian needs a podcast these days, basically. But we wanted to give it a name to just let people know that don't take us too seriously. Like, we're not proper historians, so we will go research on the internet, but I'm not buying books. I'm not talking to historians to corroborate anything. It's basically anything that I want to say on the podcast is basically true, as is the way with history. It's written by what's the saying? It's written by Jason Brennan.
Does John L. Sullivan own a bunch of car dealerships in Sacramento by any chance? Did you discover that in your research?
I didn't know, to be honest, but I haven't. Is that? Did you live in Sacramento? No, you're down in San Diego, is it?
Down in San Diego, yeah. But I've driven through Sacramento. I've never seen John L. Sullivan up there, but I wasn't looking out for a man with no shirt selling cars, so he might be up there.
He could be. He could be one of those like inflatable, the moving rubber. I see those things all the way here for the car sales. It's not so much cars in Texas as it is giant trucks. Just
it sounds like Steve Smathers tried to buy a used vehicle off a man with 2 cauliflower ears. I'll give you a fair price if you can fight my shoes. I think that this was the equivalent of a costume change, I suppose. I've just moved now. Everyone's gone to bed, and I've moved up here to the other room.
You're just going to keep changing rooms throughout the whole thing, like a Lady Gaga show.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me more about this John L. Sullivan character. So apart from his car dealership days or stopping people at the library in Dublin, what else has he been up to?
Well, so because at the time, pugilism wouldn't have been, there was no like set, WBO, WBC, like boxing commission or whatever. So you would just go around fighting random people in towns, or in like, you'd go to like a Carnegie Hall kind of equivalent of any city that you'd go to, and men would just be in there, line up. John L. Sullivan's coming along. Do you want to fight him? Okay, grand. You'll get knocked out. And then that's pretty much how he would make his living. He became so famous that he would be then obviously requested to go to. At one point he went over to France to fight for. Damn it! I should have looked that up directly before the podcast. I think it was.
Some French dignitaries.
Yeah, some dignitary. But yeah, it was just one man out in a chateau, and just two fellas fought 75 rounds over the space of about 4 or 5 hours just for some French dignitary. And then just lived off that. Like no one thought it was just that's it.
It was in the rain. I remember that story being, and also I'm pretty sure it was illegal. So a lot of these fights would just be broken up by the police at the end. Like after 4 or 5 hours, the cops would just come in and stop the fight, and then they'd be right. But there'd be no punishment for it. So it was just that was just the end of the fight.
Yeah, because he would have fought some fights on boats, because it's off in the water, so the police couldn't come and stop it. So it's just
it wouldn't be a whole lot of what you would know as rules, I suppose, to the thing, Mary. It was just two men scrapping.
Imagine being so addicted to fighting, though, that you're like, Jesus, maybe we could find a boat or something to do it on. Like, is there anywhere we can go to throw shapes?
You need great balance, I reckon, to be fighting on a boat, so you wouldn't just be kind of moving with the thing.
You need your sea legs on you, I suppose, yeah.
Jeff Adams has a couple of those whiskies, he said. He has a non-age statement and a 10-year-old whiskey, a couple of John Sullivan whiskies. I've never tried it, but I'll keep an eye out for it. I think it was from Cooley Distillery too.
Was it?
Yeah, I believe so. Jeff will know better. He'll correct us if we're wrong.
Yeah, but I think his big thing was his last fight that he would have won, but that was, I try to think now, it was in Louisiana somewhere, I believe, but it was obviously illegal, so you have to try and figure out a way to get thousands of people to an event that's illegal. So there was trains going to unnamed locations trying to find a way so people could go see Sully's last big fight, because then it became a professional sport and they stopped with the bare knuckle. Everyone had to start wearing gloves and such. But they were like, I think it was the mayor of Louisiana trying to shut it down. It wasn't the same afterwards. They don't make them like they used to get.
When the survival rate went up past 20%, I'd lost interest at that stage.
Yeah, you're kind of losing out on most of the action at that stage, really.
Yeah.
That would have been a fun kind of a moment for the local police as dozens of trains roll into town with thousands of people who are like, I don't know, I'm just here for tourism. I'm just strolling around. No, don't mind me.
Or even when they were leaving wherever they were coming from and there'd be hundreds of people around the station, the cops would be like asking the train driver, where are you going? I don't know. Just following the tracks, buddy. I don't know where it goes.
Just needed a vacation. Just needed fancy getting out of the city for a little bit.
I'm heading to Fight Town.
Just me and my 5,000 friends. We just fancy the jolly boys out.
It's a good job it wasn't in Ireland. There wouldn't be many trains connecting different cities to get you there. No, you'd have had 6 changes at Port Arlington and Limerick Junction before you get there.
I know, that'd be still as true today as it was back then.
I'll tell you this now, Barry. I tried to get a train from Killarney to Cork City there in August. Most complicated thing I've ever done.
Did it go via Dublin, via Houston Station?
It went via Dublin in northern Canada, the lesser known Dublin.
Dublin, Texas.
Dublin, Texas was. I think we stopped off in Mallow for an hour and a half. In the sunny port of Mallow before heading back to Cork. But
was that a short comfort stop, as it used to have been advertised years ago on the bus journeys? You had, if you were going from Cork to Dublin on the bus, on the timetable it said short comfort stop in Boris and Ossory.
Stretch the legs. Yeah. Well, I've done that now. Well, there's 80 more minutes, so sit tight.
Have you met Boris? There's a little else to do after that. That was one of the other first episodes we did, was about the Kingdom of Ossory, actually. And you took great umbrage to Carlo being excluded from this.
Because it was, I believe, in the 14th century, Carlo was the capital of Ireland. The King of Ireland lived in Carlo, down in the not the Bonnery. What's it called? Is it the Bonnery Forest? Whatever it is. But I Nationwide did an episode about this at some point. So I'm ceding all knowledge to them. And if I'm wrong about it, it's Nationwide Northe's problem from about
Barry. I don't know if you have like a fact checker or someone like live checking. I'll save you the time anyway. I don't think Carlow was ever the capital of the country of Ireland at any stage.
I've never heard that. No, I must have overlooked that in history, but I know our audience are very good at correcting me when I'm wrong, so they'll definitely correct you if you're wrong, because they have no emotional connection to you yet. So if they're willing to go for my throat, they'll definitely go for years.
More than fair. They can't be as harsh as the people who comment on Reddit anyway. So that's
it's we're used to it now at this stage.
So where did John L. Sullivan end up? What was your story?
Oh, it's sad by the end of it, because it's just, I think, as with most men who get punched in the head for a living.
I suppose if you think of what happens to the average boxer now when they've sort of like finished their career as a boxer, and then implant 1800s values onto that, and it didn't work out too well for him.
Yeah, he'd squandered all of his money and then eventually pretty much ended up fairly destitute. I think he would always fight, so he would be sent around for he would go on tours to Ireland. And then it was I've been in America too long. I pronounced Ireland really weird there. Ireland. Yeah, Ireland. He would go over on tours over there to go fight people. And then obviously anywhere where there would be a lot of either boxing fans or Irish people, he would go there to fight. But by the end, he was... They never said, obviously, it's a different time period. It sounded like he got cancer or he got something along the lines because he lost an awful lot of weight very quickly. His health took a turn for the worse, and eventually he ended up destitute and just alone and died that way, which is probably the way for most fighters, which isn't great. I shouldn't be laughing or smiling.
No. With nothing but a set of car dealerships to his name in Sacramento. The poor fellow.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Poor form.
You've heard the adage, like, if you're good at something, don't do it for free. That's something Sully never really copped on to. He loved fighting too much, I think. He was
he was fond of the alcohol.
Money, but he did it for free.
I like to think he was fond of the alcohol, and the only way to get that was in between rounds of fighting. So he was... Yes,
that's what he was going for.
I wonder, is being a fighter a bit like what you might experience as comedians? I'd imagine that the most awful thing a comedian can be asked is, just tell me a joke or say something funny. And would you, if you're a fighter, is that your life? That Jizz, I'll take you. I'd bait you for your whole life. I
think it genuinely is. I think anyone I've ever interviewed, as a journalist, has always pretty much said the same, that most people are fine. Most people are very nice, and most people also don't want to try and fight a fighter or ever annoy a fighter. But there probably is about 2% of fellas out in the world that go, I could handle him. I could be a pro. I just never trained. I could go. Yeah. Go on, why not? Have a go. I'm sure, what's his name? Paddy Barnes. He probably would have had an awful lot of that because he's a flyweighter, so he's a much shorter, skinnier fella, about 5'3" or 4. I'm sure most of his career, despite having a couple of Olympic medals in his pocket, were just lads walking around going, yeah, but he's little. I could probably take him.
Yeah. I think I've heard that from a lot of I don't know. It seems converse to logic, but a lot of bigger lads will just get started on more often than average size lads, because if you're bollocks in a pub and you want to fight someone to prove a point, you don't pick on the likes of me or Jason. You go for the tallest man at the bar and try and start a fight with him.
Prison rules. Rules. I think they call that.
Yeah.
Now, I saw someone just sent in a message there to verify that Carlow was the capital. But
Jim Dorr saying there, he's fighting people in the comment section actually on Facebook. He's following Queensberry rules in the comment section, saying that Carlow was the capital. Yeah.
Now, is this some sort of a half-baked alias for Jim Core? Is this some mad conspiracy? Carlow was the capital. Nonsense. They never wore masks in Carlow, and they're doing fine down there.
We don't wear masks. It was the capital of Ireland, and the entire county is 100% flat.
The flat Carlow theory.
We should ignore Jim. We have it on good authority. So Jim is not. Jim has no authority on this subject whatsoever. We'll defer to Kieran. Jim is from. Jim says he's from Tullow, however.
Okay.
Well, fair. Okay. He's like I was telling you beforehand, Barry, that there's only 3 famous people from Carlow. It's Catherine Thomas, Sean O'Brien, and myself. I think, and Sean O'Brien's from Tullow. So fair play to the tank.
Fair. I see Ken Keeley's talking about the Horse and Jockey. Is the Horse and Jockey town in? I thought it was in Tipperary. Is it in Carlow?
I'm going to.
Jesus.
Let's find out. I'm googling here now.
That's Tipperary.
It's along
Horse and
there.
Jockey.
I think it's Tipperary. It's down that way somewhere. It's along there with Boris and Ossory is one of the stranger places you'll drive through.
You can find that under strange Irish place names like Hospital and Horse and Jockey. It's in Tip.
It is in Tip, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I can honestly say I don't think I've had a pint there. Which is have you?
I had a pint there, yeah. It's
without me.
We're contractually obliged to anytime I have a drink, I need to have Jason Brennan within 5 kilometers of me, or notify his press agent,
or a Zoom chat at least.
It's impressive rider to the contract.
Listen, I should have looked over that thing.
It's a better name for a pub than a town, surely. The Horse and Jockey sounds like a British pub, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah. But it's an entire town. I assume they have some sort of horse racing affiliation or history,
or maybe it's one of those ironic names, like when they'll call a big, massive fella tiny. Like maybe there was never a horse in this town or a jockey.
And
it got its name.
It's the only town in Ireland to not produce a horse or a jockey. It's where Shergar grew up, I believe.
So John L. Sullivan died at the age of 59, says our resident fact checker JJ, and that would align with the life of a man, as you say, being bait in the head for a living.
Pretty much.
Touching 60 is a brave age for those days, though, considering his sole life was drinking and getting punched. That's not
fair,
bad.
Yeah. But also, I mean, he wouldn't have had to go to a war ever, so that would have been a main reason for people dying young at the time as well. So I think,
true.
Right, yeah. So yeah, I was saying there where you were changing rooms there, Kevin. We're talking about Jack Doyle, the famous Irish boxer from Cove, who he'd be a great topic for a podcast. But he also died penniless, like in his 70s, on the streets of London, and he had found fame and fortune in America as a boxer, a singer, an actor in Hollywood movies, and the drink got the devil of him, got the better of him, and the poor fella died penniless. So kind of a note for all of us there. Our next career move can't be moving into boxing or wrestling or anything along those lines. Like,
no.
But also, like, the life of a comedian is also heavily intertwined with alcohol as well. So I don't know. I'm not too confident.
You got a couple of good years in your early 20s, late 20s, maybe, where you're just getting knocked around every night, drinking loads of pints. Once you get over 30, if you haven't made it at that stage, no one wants to hear from you. It's not similar.
I do like Michael Mullen's comment there. How could Carlow be the capital? They can't even make their mind up on county colours. We're like a traffic light.
Show us your jersey. There you go.
It's Carlow colours, but it's actually St. Louis GAA. Shout out to St. Louis GAA if we've anyone listening up in Missouri.
I was thinking
no copyright infringement whatsoever. I don't think O'Neill's will be onto us. Azuri Azuri surely knew making this thing that they were breaking some laws.
A little bit of feedback on the whiskey here for those who are asking questions on the Busker, the blend. It's a young whiskey. You can tell it's young. I'd mix it maybe. I'd mix it with ginger ale or Coke or something. It isn't the whiskey I'd turn to sip all day long. But if you want to spend less than $30,
a party whiskey is what they're calling it now, like that. I haven't had it myself, but McGregor's one, the proper 12. Everyone says not on its own or even with ice, but
or even at all.
Dr. Pepper, or if you just want to drink Dr. Pepper on its own, that tastes great too. Probably better than mixing it with that stuff. Have you had it on the podcast, or have you sampled it yourself at all?
No, whiskey aside, like I'd be philosophically opposed to the representative's life positions and acts, and so we won't be giving any kind of airtime to him.
You're dead right.
No, you're dead right.
Simple as that.
You're dead right. Here's actually the hot sauce that I bought the other day of the man who knocked him out the other weekend.
Oh, very good, very good.
Morey's Louisiana style hot sauce.
We'll bring him on. We'll have him on the show, but we won't talk about proper 12. No. So we got a comment here from a very easy to pronounce name. Holy shit! Did you just shout out Missouri? You did. You did a shout out.
It's exactly what it is. St. Louis, Missouri. I lived for a while in Dogtown, the Irish part, like the little Ireland of St. Louis. It's a great little spot. I'll be heading back up there hopefully. I don't know, maybe March at some point.
You were mentioning on a recent podcast. Wasn't your last show? Maybe it was the one before, but the episode about wrestling and its roots, its Irish roots, which I thought was very interesting, and how so many there was you had some great stories of fights in the US that kind of followed rules that would have traced their roots back to Ireland originally, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it's Irish
before you start that, Jason, I was going to say when you're talking, I meant to say to you the other day when you were talking about Poirier's hot sauce that I was reading recently that, you know, like the classic Tabasco hot sauce that you see all around America. It's the best hot sauce in the world. Yeah, well, allegedly created by an Irishman.
No,
like if you look at the bottle, the Tabasco label, it's McElhenney that's on top of it.
You did reference this, and my housemate's a chef. He's a head chef, and he was telling me the other day. That's why I know I don't really have too much of a sense of smell, so taste is kind of out the window as well. And not when it comes to whiskey for some reason. But,
you can taste the whiskey, and that's it. But if you look at the classic Tabasco bottle, it's McElhenney's. Yeah, and I think much like all Irish etymology, there's 3 or 4 different stories as to where it came from. But apparently, it was a Limerick man in New Orleans during the Civil War. Although, like, Ireland would not be known for its spice in its food or its heat or flavor or any of those sort of things.
Tabasco isn't very spicy. It's not hot. No,
it's not. But like, if you had dropped Tabasco into 1860s Ireland, it would have caused the revolution.
It would have, yeah.
I think we already have some revolutions there, Kev.
Even mentioning black pepper. I mean, black pepper would be too much of a spice in Ireland. Like, salt would be as far as you'd go.
Jesus, where'd you black pepper? Are you coming back from the Silk Road? God, no. My stomach, I don't have the constitution.
Royalty you are with your black pepper.
Jesus, black pepper, God.
But no, yeah, my housemate was telling me that that Tabasco, the standard general Tabasco, is the best hot sauce in the world in terms of the quintessential taste of hot sauce. Which, to be honest, not really for me. It's not great. But those crazy ones, the ones that taste like battery acid, like ghost peppers and all of those, like chilies, they're great. But I like them, but I don't enjoy the crying during and after. Like they're a bit too spicy for me.
Yeah.
I went on a date last year before COVID, and there's a Zilker brewery in Austin. They have a food truck outside of it called Spicy Boys, and they had a mango and lime ghost pepper like rub on the chicken wings, and I was like, oh sure, I can handle that. And I don't think I've ever been on a date before where I just cried for a half an hour straight.
Usually that happens afterwards.
Liam says there's Tabasco sauce fermented for 6 years in Jack Daniel's casks. Is it the same one? Is that the standard one, or is it a special one? There's a whiskey connection now.
That sounds very special. Fair play to you, Liam. No, I'm going to have to look that up now. Also, now that we've been talking about Tabasco, I might have to go get some Tabasco. Because it's only about, that's the thing, all these fancy hot sauces, they're all about, $12, $15. Seemingly the best one and the best reviewed one is only about $1 or $2, and people just like the names.
Yeah.
Probably the same as the whiskeys.
It's the same with it's sort of got a craft image, I suppose, over the last few years. A lot like craft beer, the craft hot sauces.
Liam says that's the standard one.
Oh,
right.
So it's fermented for 6 years. No, there you go. No wonder you like it.
Trust the Irishman to put the hot sauce into the whiskey barrels.
That's it.
I've always been fascinated by the use of barrels, and 2 good friends of mine would have worked over in the Galway Bay Brewery, and they would have been, I don't know, extremely excited about getting their hands on like old age caskets, just to throw a lot of the stuff that wasn't able to produce beer, or like the off spill or stuff that had been spoiled or whatever, chuck it in an old basket, seal it up for 7 years and see what happens. Yeah. Which just seems like a crazy, like how you would have any idea as to what it's going to taste like in a couple of years, or like how you'd have any control over it. It always seems like a really interesting area to me.
And that's one of the that kind of experimentation is really the root of a lot of innovation or unintended consequence innovation. Really, I suppose, in the Irish whiskey world, like one of the biggest selling Irish whiskies in the world after Jameson would be Jameson cask mates, the Jameson that's finished in either stout casks or IPA casks, and that was a happy accident too, just kind of a collaboration with the Franciscan Well Brewery in Cork back in the day, and just trying something out, not knowing where it would go, and now selling millions of cases around the world.
And so they brought those casks back then. So they sold them to Franciscan Well, and then
the Franciscan Well borrowed. They asked if they could get the lend of the classic kind of Cork kind of ask. Can I borrow a few casks?
Can I have a hop off your cask?
Yeah, like in 7 years.
They asked for the casks, and I think they got 6 casks, and they put their Franciscan Well stout into the casks for I think a few months, and then so they turned their stout they turned one product into 2 products, which was their stout into whiskey aged stout, and got a lovely flavor to it. And then they sent the casks back down to Middleton, and then the Middleton guys said, "Jesus, now that we've got a cask that used to have Jameson, then it had porter in it. Why don't we throw Jameson back into it and see what happens?" Forgot about the casks for a few months, came back a bit later, found them, opened them up, and realized, "Geez, we have a whole new product item here." So you got 2 products turned into 4, and made everyone a little bit wealthy, I think.
And now they've got the IPA, which seems like
IPA as well.
That doesn't sound like such a happy accident. That sounds like a marketing ploy, because I don't think Ireland was doing too many IPAs back then.
Well, as the marketing line goes, it's not Indian Pale Ale, it is Irish Pale Ale.
It's fair.
That's what the I stands for. Yeah.
Because they do have the American Pale Ales over here, and then we might as well bring one back to Ireland. We'll go full IPA.
It's they're very, very popular with the bartenders and very popular in cocktails, like those cask mates editions. But yeah, wood is fascinating, like what you can do. But just I don't know how we got down that rabbit hole. Oh, Tabasco.
No, it's just, I suppose, an area I've always found very, very interesting about the whiskey. I've been on a few, and I don't think I've ever been to a distillery, but I've been to a few breweries and been given tours of breweries. I haven't learned anything. But I've been on a few of them. But that's something I always found. The randomness of it, I suppose, or the sort of hope and the prayer nature of it. I know Slane whiskey is produced not too far away from me in Slane, and my dad had met Lord Mount Charles, his son, who had done it, and had been speaking to him about it, and just the idea of setting aside so it was a minimum of 3 years of your time and distillery productions in order to hopefully produce something that's worth drinking. And he was saying one of the big drawbacks is when you finally produce the whiskey, because it's a new whiskey, all the connoisseurs and all the collectors buy it, but no one drinks it. So you can't pass on by word of mouth that it's actually any use. So you've produced all these bottles, and then all of a sudden, like, no one's tasting it. So then when the next set of bottles comes around, no one knows if it's actually worth buying to actually drink the damn thing.
There's a lot of ornaments on shelves, all right, to be fair, with all these new distilleries popping up. Like, there's 30 new distilleries in Ireland in the past 10 years, and those first releases become coveted, and they start trading for mad money on auctions and all kinds of things. But it's time to. There's a hashtag gets used on Irish Whiskey Twitter, which is hashtag seal breakers. Like, if you open a bottle, you're a hero. Like
SEAL Team 6 going in and actually taking a sip of whiskey. But Jez, if that's what the qualifying mark for a hero is, I'm fairly much Cuchulainn myself, going into the breach time after time.
And not all heroes wear capes, Kev.
Exactly, Jason. Yeah.
What did you pour, Kevin? Did you pour a different drink there, or are you still in the same one?
No, I'm still sipping away at the green spot here.
I poured the Sexton there a minute ago, and I just had a sip of it. I'm going to pour a whole lot more of it now.
I'll get that up next. That'll be my next one.
And we can compare. You're going to know a whole lot more than I will, but I'll tell you this: it tastes good. That's my review.
Well, do you know what? When we talk about if we're going to have an old scale and story about Bushmills in a bit, we can talk about the Sexton comes from Bushmills, so we can tie that in. But when we were chatting during the week, and you shared what is maybe, as you might have pointed out, one of the greatest pieces of journalism ever written in Ireland. Yes. And it is a whiskey story. And I yield my time and the floor to ye for this, because this is a tremendous piece of literature.
So I'll take this one, and it's I'd found this story a few years ago, and it's the perfect cross, like Venn diagram kind of thing, between journalism, Ireland, mad stories, and drinking. I'm going to read it verbatim from the Irish Independent, and a man called Gordon Deegan. Words to him, I'll give him the credit. But a farmer blasted his friend with a double-barrel shotgun at close range after telling him he was a tout for the Gardaí, a court heard today. Liam Flynn, 53, has pleaded guilty to assault causing harm of his friend Noel Enright at his farmhouse in Affleck, Tulla, County Clare. An Ennis Circuit Court counsel, Mr. Flynn, said that his client shot his great pal, I'll do the air quotes, in the left upper thigh after he had drank 2 pints of whiskey. Now, I don't know if we've gotten through that between us yet. I don't know if
wouldn't be normally measured in pints.
Not usually, no, it's kind of like pints of wine. Like, it's not really a cup.
Yeah.
But the 2 church-going friends of 20 years used to meet up regularly at Mr. Enright's house, at Mr. Flynn's house. It was a remote little cottage near the village of Tulla. They would meet up once a week. The pair would consume volumes of alcohol.
Volumes.
Yeah.
A standard metric unit.
Yes.
Volumes.
Because you could be on pints, it just goes to volumes.
Yeah, it's either pints or volumes. There's nothing in between. Yeah.
How much have you had to drink tonight? Volumes.
It's multiple volumes.
Amount.
An encyclopedia amount of they would watch their favorite TV show as they would drink these pints of whiskey, and that was Sons of Anarchy, that drama about the US gang of outlaw bikers. The court heard that the Garda witnesses in the case who arrived at the house after 2:15 a.m. Found a blood-soaked Mr. Enright on the couch with blood and flesh splattered across the wall behind him. The court heard that 2 days before the events of January 28, 2015, the two had gone to the cathedral in Ennis to present Bishop Kieran O'Reilly's, or to be present at Bishop Kieran O'Reilly's last mass in the diocese with Mr. Enright's girlfriend.
How did they get tickets to that?
I know, it'd be tough, wouldn't it? It's also, I just love the idea of like God-fearing men drinking pints of whiskey and just throwing around. Like, I assume sawn-off shotguns. I don't think this is
the completely irrelevant details to the story. Like 2 days before, they went to mass.
Yeah, it was like, just I assume that was the lawyer just trying to make the case at the time that they're not bad. They're okay.
A pious man, a very pious man.
Whereas this bishop was doing this for one night only, one last tour.
It's like he might shoot you, but he'll repent afterwards. During the case, the 2 men offered conflicting accounts of what occurred on the night. In his statement to the Gardaí, Mr. Enright said, "I remember Liam saying to me, 'Do you know that girl Tacky you're seeing? She's a spy.' He said, 'For who?' Gardaí, obviously. You know.
All right, of course. They're trying to get
the Gardaí spies just around the country.
Yeah, jeez.
I think that's what we call whistleblowers today.
Because they're always blowing whistles.
He said that at the start, I started roaring, laughing, and Liam jumped up and pulled out his gun and put his gun to shoulder level and said, "You're a fucking tout for the Gardaí."
Yeah, I suppose.
I should have probably asked beforehand, can I curse on this podcast? Because it is too late now. And also, I'm the one person on our podcast who doesn't curse. And that's because in daily life, I curse far too often.
So don't worry about it. Go back to the point where he raised the gun to his shoulder level.
Also, to explain for people outside the country, a tout would be the equivalent of a snitch, I suppose. That's a very Northern Irish term for someone who's
snitch.
Snitch.
Yes, and because in America, I think they say snitches get stitches, whereas in Ireland, stitches get a shotgun case to the leg.
Well, the Irish equivalent would be touts out. If you came home one day and saw touts out spray painted across your door, it was time to move country and change the old name.
They're on to me. It's happening.
Yeah.
I'm ratting out too many people making fake social welfare claims. Yeah, but he'd said that he's a tout for the Gardaí, and bang, he shot me. I was sitting on the couch. However, Mr. Flynn told Gardaí, he's my best friend for years, and the gun just went off. Which are very conflicting reports, because he's leaving out the entire monologue he said before he shot his friend.
He probably said, look at my new gun. Yeah, the best angle is from the barrel. That's where you really see the majesty of the thing. And then it went off by accident.
Well, Flynn had said that the two had been playing with a toy gun. And then Mr. Enright said, why don't you bring up the real thing? He said, I brought it up. I had it in my hands. I tapped him on the knee with the barrel. It just went off. It was a pure accident. I'm a good man, Gardaí. I did nothing wrong.
Don't worry about that flesh on the wall. That's only a surface wound. It's only a scratch.
Yeah. If you went round poking and prodding at every bit of blood and flesh on a man's wall, sure, you get no work done. God's sake.
I love the detail of the completely irrelevant detail of things like they bonded over Sons of Anarchy and they went to mass, yet no mention of the whiskey they were drinking. What was it? Was it Paddy, Powers? What kind of whiskey would give you this kind of a reaction?
There is no reference to it, because I did go on a little hunt there to try and see if I could find it, and there's nothing. Like, literally nothing. They're too busy. Also, the reason I love this story is because of the Sons of Anarchy and the fact that it's kind of two middle-aged old fellas meeting up once a week to scull pints of whiskey and just watch an American TV show that, in fairness, does go to Ireland in one season.
It's in there. A lot of it's set in Belfast.
That's right.
Well, not a lot of it, but bits of it. I'd say whatever marketing department. I'd say the whiskey was initially in the story, and then the marketing department came along and was like, maybe drop that out there. We're trying to ixnay on the whole old lads murdering each other. That's not good for the brand.
What's wonderful about the story too is the remarkable acknowledgement of the combined Irish condition of alcohol, mass, watching American television, whiskey, and then blowing a fella's leg off. Apparently, seems to be a lovely synopsis of Ireland there.
Well, it's a nice way to bookend the night, because without it, you'd be kind of like, it's the equivalent of you need a kebab at the end of a night in a pub. If you're drinking at home with a friend, you shoot them in the kneecap. That's
See you next week.
Yeah. It's Garda. I'm gonna have my best go at pronouncing this. Eomer, like IOMAR or Yummer.
I thought you'd been in America for far too long and you were struggling with Emer there.
Yeah, I know. Well, I struggled to say Ireland earlier on, so I think. But Emer McLaren agreed with Mr. Flynn's counsel that both men's recollections were not reliable because of the level of alcohol consumed.
Stop.
What are you talking about?
In fact, it wasn't Sons of Anarchy they were watching at all. It was a completely different series.
Television wasn't even on. I don't even own a television.
They've been watching the box sets of the Gilmore Girls, and that was the only part of the story they'd lied about.
It was reruns on the wireless. But Mr. Enright underwent a number of surgeries for the wound, where more than 100 pellets were found.
100 pellets?
Yeah. Well, a shotgun, I suppose. So it's going to
it's
got a good spread.
Yeah.
But Garda McLaren said that he had never come across such a case in his 22 years as a Garda. The court heard Mr. Flynn has sold his property to offer €20,000 in compensation to Mr. Enright. In his victim impact statement, Mr. Enright, who was not in court, he said that he'd been left with life-changing injuries. Walking up the stairs and running and climbing are now difficult tasks. I've been a good skier. I don't know.
Was he not like a 60-year-old man from East Clare?
He was climbing up the shelves.
He was with 40.
I'll tell you this much, Gard. I shan't be going to Tuscany next season for the ski slopes, and that'll ruin me. If I don't get out of the Black Diamond, I'm in a bad form for the rest of the season.
I have been a good skier for the past 20 years and look forward to the annual getaway to the Alps. It is tragic that those days have been taken from me forever.
What year was this story from? 2015.
2015, 17, something like that. So he's been saying that he's been traveling since like the early 90s.
There's not an Irish man alive that was skiing in 1994 or 5.
He wouldn't be able to afford the clothes. Aldi didn't exist.
I like that he certainly fits the profile of an alpine skier.
Yes.
Sons of Anarchy watching, pint of whiskey drinking, old Irishmen in the country in the countryside of County Clare. Yeah, well-known alpine skiers come from there.
When you think of the fala douche of like the French-Italian borders, you can always pan around the chateau and see Seamus there. With a pint of whiskey in one hand and an undisclosed amount of whiskey in the other hand.
Volumes.
One pole in one hand, pint of whiskey in the other. Who needs the second? I can just spin in circles.
No, the weather doesn't seem right for today. I'll leave it till tomorrow.
But he said that on a day-to-day basis, I am constantly fearing another attack. This horrific event has not just left me physically scarred; it has left me mentally scarred. Judge Keyes adjourned the case that Thursday to fix a date for sentence and remanded Mr. Flynn on bail. And I couldn't find the outcome of that, but I assume they're still friends and still watch Anarchy.
Yeah.
That's the romantic ending to this. The nice bow on the top of this story is they still meet together.
Well, I wanted to know what ended up with what happened between Enright and Tacky. Are they still together? Was she a tout? What's going on?
I think someone had said in the comments that this would make a great film, but that's Act 3, where you'd have the remorse. Enright would be sent off to prison, and then your man would go back and start watching Sons of Anarchy season 6 by himself, and it would just pan over to the couch as he sadly just looks forlorn at it, and then he dropped the charges, and the two boys would get together again for the season finale.
Looks over at the couch that has 500 pellet holes inside.
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought a knee could hold 100 pellets, but sure, there you go.
Pint glasses strewn on the floor.
Probably shouldn't have shot the second bullet.
One bullet, bang, 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 bang.
But yeah, no, that's one of my favorite Irish whiskey stories. That's because we've all been in those. We've always made mistakes. We've all made mistakes having a couple of pints of whiskey.
Who hasn't made a mistake like that in their life at some point or another?
Yes.
Well, you have to give carte blanche to a man who's drinking a pint of whiskey. He's out of his own mindscape at that stage. It's not his own fault. It's the whiskey talking.
You see that excuse a lot where lads will do something, and then when they're up in court, they'll be like, sorry, judge, I'd had a volume of whiskey. I've been drinking whiskey for many years, and I've never once thought about pulling the shotgun out and shooting my mate in the leg because he ruins Sons of Anarchy on me.
I mean, I've never done it, but I've thought about it.
That's just me and you, though.
Yeah, Kevin tends to get very lippy after a couple of pints.
There's a worrying amount of people in the comments mentioning how this story in no way phases them or raises an eyebrow because it's just like a regular Tuesday or Saturday where they come from.
Yes.
This seems like an American tale. That's what happens.
But I suppose worryingly, with the whole way through that story, we were just like, sure. Yeah, like, that's what would happen.
Yeah, it's kind of standard. It's like he's called you a tout, so I mean, what are you going to do?
I mean, listen, that you can't be thrown around the T word. No,
you can't. I mean, listen, rules are rules, and things have repercussions and consequences. And I think he paid the price for his loose tongue.
Yes, the punishment fit the crime in my eyes.
Was it loose lips sink ships, and mentioning the word tout gets you a bullet in the leg?
Yeah. But we have an odd relationship with one of Belfast's most popular music groups at the minute is called Kneecap.
Kneecap.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, the rappers off Gaeilge.
Yeah, the Irish rappers, yeah.
It's only people who are born in times after the troubles that could get away with calling themselves that.
Absolutely.
And we're in balaclavas in the videos as well.
Yeah. I often think that we just live in because myself and Jason were both born in the early 90s, where like the IRA and the UDF and kneecapping and balaclavas just seem like a funny throwback. It's like in the same way, I suppose, other countries think of like 80s hairdos and funny like shoulder pads. Where like
leather pants.
Just wasn't that gas crack?
I've never heard of IRA. I've never heard that comparison between IRA kneecapping and perms and different hairstyles. But it's an interesting one. Yeah.
In the same way that people would, when
you know what it's like, Barry. You start flicking through the photo album, and all of a sudden you see 20 years ago, there's me with the balaclava, there's me with the shotgun.
It was so cool. Oh, Jesus.
I thought it was going to be a thing for years.
I would just stop. We were all delighted to get the old balaclavas on.
I think we can all agree that that was one of the finest pieces of Irish journalism that has ever been shared. I put a link to it in the comments for everyone to look at it and maybe print it out and frame it and put it over their couch so that the next time they have a buddy coming over to watch Sons of Anarchy and they're pouring pints of whiskey, they might look to it and remind themselves that all is not well sometimes after 2 pints of whiskey.
Well, I would say it's not whiskey related, but it does contend for the greatest piece of journalism I've ever seen. My local paper, there's 2 of them actually. I can't remember if it was the Democrat or the Argus, but one of the parishes in Dundalk is Blackrock, and in Blackrock there is a Chinese restaurant called the Black Wok, which already great penmanship off to a fantastic start. At some point, some unlucky lad tried to break into the Black Wok and steal the money from behind the counter, and as he hopped over, one of the chefs hit him in the head with one of the frying pans. And the title of the article headline was "Robber Hits Wok Bottom," which is amazing.
There was a crash on. I'm trying to think. It's a good few years ago now. With the Lewis in Dublin, or else it had broken down and stopped, but it was directly outside of like a sex shop or whatever. And the headline for the whole the headline was "One Track Mind." Like that's, I don't know how many people are going to get this, but that's brilliant.
You wait your whole career for that. Like that is your crowning moment, and then you go home. It's done. You can't beat it.
Yeah, you change profession at that stage. That's you give it all up for a life of carpentry, I think.
Jason, do you like the Sexton at all?
I do. It's I poured a little bit earlier on before people from the office left, and I guess most people over in America aren't used to, like in general, Irish whiskies, but just everyone was shocked by how smooth it was and how light and vibrant, because they're all used to either, obviously just they'll drink Jameson, but then it's it's Scotch or else bourbon, and people couldn't believe that they wouldn't get a horrible burning sensation in the back of their throat because it just went straight to their chest.
Yeah, this is a very affordable single malt, and it's very approachable. Like, it's young, it comes from Bushmills. Bushmills is actually owned by a Mexican family that owns Jose Cuervo Tequila. And they've put a big push on kind of diversifying the offerings out of Bushmills. Like that, you've got Proper 12 is made in Bushmills. Well, part of it is made in Bushmills, and now you've got the Sexton is made in Bushmills. And like Bushmills itself, the distillery, all they make 100% in the distillery is single malt, which is just whiskey made from malted barley. That's all they make. So whenever they make a blended whiskey, they get their grain, they mix it with like their French maize, their corn. They get that from Middleton Distillery. And so they just make single malt. So they're great at single malt. So they know what they're doing with single malts. This would be one of the youngest single malts they'd release, and they just repackaged it. They've put it under a Sexton brand. It's an unusual whiskey. It's an unusual bottling. First of all, the shape of it, you'll notice, is actually the same shape as the Giant's Causeway. The rocks, those basalt columns.
Yes.
So it is a hexagonal thing. Yeah, I wouldn't have noticed that, to be honest. Now, Barry, you say that you might have noticed that. I definitely wouldn't have.
I was being kind. I was being generous. But a little hat tip to its Northern Irish roots there, not too far from the distillery itself. But it's a young whiskey, but 100% malted barley, and it's aged uniquely in ex-sherry butts, sherry casks. And so it gives us a kind of a lovely, there's a dark fruit kind of spice to it, a little bit of vanilla, but it's fairly approachable. It's not the most smooth or the most tasty or flavorful whiskey that Bushmills creates, but for its price point and its age, I think they do a great job with it.
I was going to say, because it's a young, free and single. It's not quite free, but it's only about $22 a bottle over here. So
it's very, very affordable. Yeah. It is. I think it has won the award anecdotally as the worst bottle in Irish whiskey for pouring. It always drips. It's got a very thick.
If anyone, my Instagram story there I was putting it into Irish coffee just so I'd stay awake before we'd start this, and trying to pour it into that is like, you can even see on the story, I'm spilling it everywhere. It's all over the table. Like
It's all over my top of my box there now. It's everywhere. Like
it's
I'll be looking at that later.
What I would recommend to people is do a heavy pour. Don't be trying to like tipple it out. You want to just
Upside down.
Get a big basin, a big fish bowl, and then just kind of upside down, pull the thing out, and away we go.
Ronan says, shocking to work with as a pour. Maureen, who has got the closed captioning turned on, says that the transcription is killing her. I can only imagine with that story of the guards and touts, how that was turning up on the closed caption.
I'd imagine it just threw up its arms there and gave up. Now, what I don't know. Do we have? I was going to try and send in a photo there, but just when you were talking about the hexagonal shapes of the Giants' cause,
I'll pull them up here.
What I was just going to say, it's one of my favorite Irish facts that is where Led Zeppelin's "House of the Holy," the album cover, is shot on those rocks.
Huh.
Yeah, which is something I haven't seen referenced in too many places. But that is
here we have. I have a fantastic picture here that you're going to absolutely love. All right, let me pull this up. Let me see if this can. God bless the internet for the wonderful things you can find here. Here is a man.
Oh,
I
don't know who this man is, but he's taking great pride in holding the album while standing there.
Yes, jeez, he's got the. I thought that was photoshopped in. No, he's got the LP, the full cover of it. Yeah. Now. Yeah, well, I thought, that's a very interesting fact that it is on the Giants' Causeway. But then I was reading about this about a year or so ago, and I found out that the people on that album are actually like 12 and 13. They're two children that the band knew who are on that cover, and it's just the same two children like copied across, which makes the whole thing a little bit more weird. But
they're just lying there in the nip.
I always thought it was like, just a load of women lying on the Giants' Causeway in the nip. But no, it's two 13-year-old children. But Steve Smathers says the greatest band of all time.
And Steve would know. He knows things. He knows the John L. Sullivan dealerships.
Absolutely.
And he knows the greatest band.
Well, the first time Stairway to Heaven was played live anywhere was in Belfast. In front of, apparently, like they have a plaque up in Belfast Hall. They have a plaque up saying like first time Led Zeppelin played Stairway to Heaven. What they don't mention is that it was received fairly poorly.
Like most critics.
Because like Led Zeppelin are.
I'm going to say it now. Here, Steve. I'm disagreeing. I don't think they're the greatest band of all time. I think that they're quite overrated. They're not. They're very good, but they're nowhere near that.
Led Zeppelin are class, but I would say if you hadn't heard Stairway to Heaven at all, and you think about their back catalogue, and you went to see like Led Zeppelin, and then they came home with a little like dee 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 dee,
I'd be thinking that sounds a lot like. That sounds like a lot like that Taurus song, that band that was supporting them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or it sounds an awful lot like Turlough O'Carolan. There was a blind poet from like the 17th century.
The
harp player, yes.
Belfast Harp Festival.
Have you heard this, Barry? There's a song of his that's very similar to Stairway to Heaven.
No.
Sorry. Michael Mullen said Steve Smathers never heard of the Small Doctors.
You're dead right, Mike. You're dead right. Best band of all time, the Soul Doctors. I saw a cover of N17 there recently.
I was going to say, like the Stairway to Heaven and N17 could go head to head, and N17 would win every time.
Oh God, not only is it a great song, Stairway to Heaven, you follow the directions, you get nowhere near heaven. Now N17, you follow those directions, you'll be in Galway in an hour's time. It's not only fashionable, but it's functional.
Well, I suppose, while we're on the topic of music, I was meant to give a shout out to my. I think they're listening now. Actually, they're live back in Dublin. My friends James and Eva. James just released a single this week called "Braid." He's a musician. Used to be in a band called Sync, and that's the last plug I'm going to give. Kev, you can do all the plugs from now on. I love you.
Have we a plug from? Can we put up a Spotify or a website? What can we put up for him?
Oh, you would be. Yeah, James Lonergan would be the. Yeah, you'll find it. It's on the YouTube. You'll find, it's all there. And the Spotify, he's all around. You'll find him. Or else follow me and I'll send you a private link.
Here, look. Search YouTube for James Lonergan. You wouldn't know what you'll find. Maybe you'll find a singer or a man standing on the Giants Causeway holding a picture of an album.
Well, when he'd asked me earlier on to be like, could you give me a shout out? I was like, yeah, sure. You just put a single out this week. He was like, oh, no, not for the music, just for myself and the missus, just to say hi. I was like, that's
how you getting on?
Terrible marketing, James. That's not like, it's the 21st century. Promote your music.
Well, it's no better than you, where you're like, I just want to, break the show here. Sorry, Barry, I'm going to cut across. You break the show here to give a shout out to my friend James. He's released a new single. Have you got a link for that or anything? Yeah, just Google it.
Yeah,
you find it. It's on the internet.
And opportunity lost.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also concerned now that picture of your man standing there like wide-eyed with the Led Zeppelin album. That's me. That's who I am. I'm only a couple of years away from doing that myself. But
well, look, everyone needs a goal, and that man achieved his.
The other famous Irish painting, again, I'm a bit biased because Carlo, but I think did I ever tell you this, Kev? In Goodfellas, the scene when they go to Joe Pesci's mother's house and there's a painting of a fella on a boat. That's from Carlo. That was a Carlo painter on down in Burris, I think, on the River Barrow. And
right.
Just somehow Scorsese's mother actually found it. And she just loved the painting, had it. And then he was like, I'm putting that on the wall in the movie.
Jesus.
And then that's the painting that they actually reference in the movie and they talk about. That's from Carlo.
Huh. There you go. Just when you think about it, really, if you sit down and think about it,
it was
the invented culture.
Pretty much. If we didn't invent it, we improved on it.
There you go. Do I amuse you? Am I some sort of clown? Funny, ha ha, how? There was butchering some lines from Goodfellas.
Oftentimes, I don't know whether people are talking to us in the comments or talking to each other, so I'll put up random things on the screen, and our guests typically scramble to figure out, was that related to something I said, or was it something that somebody else said 16 comments ago?
Sure,
in the comments.
Yeah.
When we were talking during the week about the stories we were going to tell, you shared some ideas of some of the stories, and one of them was, you said, you stated definitively and categorically that Bushmills is the oldest distillery in Ireland or England, dating back to 1608. And I replied, ha 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 ha! Now we're talking. Let's get into this.
Yes.
Because this may be open to dispute and debate, and as we're sipping on the Sexton, no better time to talk about the old Bushmills distillery, I think.
Yeah, which I don't know if it's still the case. I was living in Belfast about 4 years ago. 5 years ago. It was on the £20 note up until recently enough. I think they revamped them all. But a big part of Northern culture. So if you're about to dispute that it is what it says it is, prepare for the backlash, I suppose.
If you dispute anything, the ultimate retort and response is, sure, isn't it on the £5 note? Or sure, isn't it on a stamp? And sure, there, and that's it. I have no more argument,
You've got no more argument, yeah.
But of course, every bottle of Bushmills, Bushmills itself, not the Sexton, but every bottle of Bushmills has the date 1608 embossed upon it. And it is in fact, even here in San Diego, if I leave the apartment and I walk 20 feet outside my door, I'll see a sign advertising Bushmills, and it'll say something like, before Kentucky, before whiskey, before America, there was Bushmills. Really playing up to the old 1608 thing like that. Back before even the 1700s, Bushmills was there. And how the marketing language goes or positioning goes is that Bushmills is the oldest licensed distillery in the world, and was it King James II in 1608 granted a license to them to distill, and they've been distilling ever since. That is a modicum of the truth, and while we love Bushmills, and
it's an absolute shite, Barry, you can say.
This is not. I would argue. I think while nobody in Bushmills or any of us were around at the time to dispute the actual circumstances regarding this, what we do know is that in 1608 a license was granted to someone in the vicinity to distill. Now, that is a great thing to be able to co-opt many years later and say, that was probably Bushmills.
That's sure right. No, it was in the parish. If it wasn't us, it was one of us, you know.
Right. So and this actually popped up in our Facebook group during the week. Somebody posted, Caroline Brannigan posted a picture she'd found in an old copy of, I think, Time magazine or some iconic American magazine. She found an ad from 1937 that was advertising Bushmills. And this is a classic. Let me find this one to put it up here. And while we won't settle the debate for everyone, because everyone has what they choose to believe, let me put this up here. Okay, so here we have an advert that is wonderfully called "The Strange Fascination of the Seventh Drink of Bushmills." And the argument that it's making here is that after the 7th drink of Bushmills, men tell us it's the one whiskey they would take with them on a desert island. Now, this ties perfectly in with our 2 pints of whiskey story.
I would say the last thing you would need on a desert island would be
a volume of Bushmills.
Fortune magazine. This is Fortune magazine. James is correcting us. After the 7th drink of Bushmills, which I would argue that after the 7th drink of any whiskey, you wouldn't know if you were drinking out of a bucket or a shoe, and what you were drinking, I'd say, would be in dispute.
Although they've said that would counteract Jason's point that after 7 drinks of any whiskey, you'd be like, do you know what I'd need if I was on a desert island? I'd need nothing but the pint in front of me. Whatever this stuff is, that's all I'd need. It's all I'd want. That's all I'll have.
Just a pint of whiskey, just a pint of Bushmills will do me.
That'll do me grand.
It started with a pint of plain as your only man, and by the end of it, it was a pint of whiskey is all I need on a desert island.
What I love here is that they're making... It's almost like such a stretch for them to make the case for Bushmills, because they're saying it takes 7 Bushmills for a man to say, that's the drink I want. But he doesn't even say that at that stage. What he then says is, after 7 drinks, the fascinating flavor, in quotation marks, grows on you. like some kind of growth, like a pimple.
Do you know what it is now when you're half bollocks on a bottle of Bushmills? You start to think maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I was wrong to judge it. The first 6 drinks, the 7th drink started to tip me over. By the 8th, I was thinking you get used to the smell. It's sort of homely after a while.
So with that big kind of build up, you can only imagine this is going to be a great drink. But they say that's why for 152 years Bushmills has been the whiskey of connoisseurs. So this is where they show their hand here, and because we now have access to this magazine, we can factually determine that so if 1937 minus 152 years is a long way from 1608, I think we'll agree it's more the 1700s, late 1700s.
Yeah.
So
we're nitpicking at that stage then, Barry.
What's a couple hundred years when it comes to maturing whiskey? So we dug into this a little bit, and the feedback that we got on this post was that the 1608 story was something from the last 50 years, and maybe the statute of limitations had passed on being prosecuted for not telling all the truth regarding the founding of a distillery, and so it was co-opted. And so now 1608 is the story, which sadly takes advantage of the wonderful Kilbeggan distillery right in the heart of Ireland, which is dates back to 1757, which itself actually predates Bushmills, but is always falling kind of second fiddle because of the 1608 on the bottle. So there you go.
Well, sure, look, Kilbeggans can't be choosers.
That's not bad. But it's a weird, it's a weird thing to try and co-opt the idea of having built your distillery in, because where the Bushmills distillery is in near Portrush, is it, or it's like North Antrim?
North Antrim, yeah, in the town of
Portrush,
town of Bushmills, yeah.
Oh, the town of Bushmills. But so 1608, it might not be the exact year, but that's like the flight of the Earls and the start of the Ulster plantations. So of all times to be like, we were a small little company with just the tuppence in our pocket, and we set up the little distillery you've ever seen in this country when Northern Ireland was going through a couple of 100 years before Northern Ireland became a thing. But this is the starting points of complete restructure of what the country was. There we were in 1940s Germany. There wasn't much happening, but there was a nice little distillery popping up, and their own thing. It's a weird time, like especially if you're 150 years off. It's a weird time to be like, that's when we started, right when Ireland was getting toppled by the Ulster plantations from the Scottish and English. That's when we decided it's time to make a great whiskey the whole family can enjoy.
It's almost like two different copywriters were put into two separate rooms and told to write an ad, and then they brought in their ad, and one talked about this incredible whiskey for those who love their whiskey of connoisseurs, and the other person said, "Jesus, after 7 of them, it'll grow on you." And whoever looked at it and said, "Jesus, those are both very good. Why don't we combine them into one ad and save some money?" And they did.
We have space for both. We've paid them both now to write the things. There's no point throwing one of them out.
But it's great marketing. It's great marketing, because if you were going to say, "Oh, this is a beautiful whiskey," you'd have one sip of it and you go, "Oh, well, I'll make my decision then." But the other fella's idea is you have to drink 7 of them. It's kind of like the equivalent of like shampoo: wash, rinse, repeat. They're just trying to make you use the shampoo twice, so you buy twice as much or twice as frequently. It's the same thing. Have this, drink about half the bottle, it'll grow on you, and then after that, go buy another bottle.
Yeah,
I feel like they've missed an opportunity though. Like, you don't see it very often, but there was an opportunity there to say, we've been distilling for donkey's years. And that's a phrase you don't see in the whiskey world very often, but donkey's years would be a well-known Irish term, equal, I suppose, in measurement to volumes of whiskey.
Yeah.
Barry, I was going to ask, you've spent a lot more time in America than I have. I've probably been over here for 4 or 5 years in the space of the last 6 or 7, but that's about it. You've been here, you said, what, 14 years?
Yeah.
And you're saying that Bushmills is now. Did you notice it in Ohio as well, or was it mainly since you've moved over to California that you've seen as much Bushmills? Because the only reference I never see it in Texas, and the main reference point I have for Bushmills is that line that Jimmy McNulty says in The Wire.
What's that line?
He goes to a fancy gala, like a big party for politicians, wherever he goes up. It's an open bar. He says, "Can I get a Jameson?" And they say, "We don't have Jameson. We only got Bushmills." Ain't that a Protestant whiskey?
Oh yeah.
And then he just drinks it anyway. And then there's no reason for that to be in the episode or anything at all whatsoever. It's an Englishman pretending to be an Irish American. Like, there's no reason other than I reckon one of the writers was like, "I just don't like Bushmills." I think they're lying about the year of their establishment.
It's sadly one of those tropes that gets thrown around. It's the age-old Jameson was Catholic and Bushmills was Protestant. And look, I think we're living in very different times now, of course, than back then, and who they employed. But like most of them would have employed who lived in the area, not were they meeting certain religious quotas and things like that. So yeah, it was very different times. That's a myth we have to quash off, and is you see it like posted online, like, "I wouldn't touch Bushmills." It's
there's no
religious divided whiskey. Yeah, it's a tough one.
But also, what I have noticed down here is it's slightly off the whiskey point, but with malt liquor, obviously it wouldn't be a very high class thing. It's not great, but I have noticed that there's 2 main brands in America, and one of them is called Ye Old English, and then the other one's called Mickey's. And Old English is like in a like clear plastic bottle or whatever. Mickey's is a big green bottle. It's like so Irish it couldn't be. Obviously, they set it up for Irish people who wouldn't drink Old English. They just like, "Oh well, there's a giant."
And what is this Old English? Oh, I see it.
Yeah, it's
Old English.
You would never drink it. The only reason you drink it really would be if you were short on money or if you were a big fan of the Beastie Boys. Have you ever heard the song Brass Monkey? That chunky, funky monkey.
You sound like you're writing a review for Bushmills whiskey. You'd never drink it now unless you were short on cash or you were desperate.
After 10 of them, it would grow on you.
God, much like my ex-wife after 10 years, she grows on you.
Well, even that line actually reminds me of the Flann O'Brien had that thing about the opposite hangover. Or give me I'll find it. Hold on.
Miles Nigoplin, but
yes, you're right. Yeah, the hold on, that's very quick. It was the first thing to pop up. It is a pink liquid. After a glass of it, you feel rather seedy. A second glass, and you're depressed. A third, and an appalling pathological morbidity has descended on you. A fourth, and you're vainly speaking the loan of a razor from the barman so that you can quietly open your throat in the back snug. A fifth, you're in a condition that does not bear description. But assuming you get home to bed, what a difference the next morning. The whole resounds with the thunderous operatic arias. Windows are thrown open, back slapped, and your joy at being alive roars in great gusts through the lives of the whole startled community. People stop to watch you in the streets in envy and astonishment. The curious effect the liquid has the next morning is called a hand gunder.
Gunder. Well, he was a wise man, old Miles.
He should have written the Bushmills ad.
Yes.
I've never come across that old English, and I can see it's a Miller drink. Miller makes it. Old English 800 malt liquor.
I wouldn't recommend it. I'd stick to the Mickeys. It's the
Mickey Fins.
Well, no, we can't. We won't get into the ethnology of that, Kevin.
That's
not. It's seemingly there is a reference to that concept of the word Mickey in America.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, continuing down the path we're on of this not being a suitable for children broadcast tonight, we've got comments like Brass Monkey was a strip joint on Long Island. Apparently, I can't remember the connection there, but. We'll mark that down.
Talking about that Funky Monkey. Brass Monkey was also a short-lived pub in Newry when I was there for a while. It wasn't a strip joint per se, but some nights went where they went.
But Tuesday night lock-ins end up with blue movies.
Yeah, you know yourself. Like it wasn't on the title board, but things happen.
But after a couple of pints of whiskey and a shotgun to the thigh, you wouldn't know where you'd be going.
After your 7 Bushmills, you're well.
8 tipples of Bushmills, you're any man's man.
If you've just joined us, I apologize. I'm here.
Apologizing, Barry. We're taking over. The inmates are running the asylum.
I don't know who I'm here with. I'm here with 2 Ludramons from Ireland.
Yes.
2 comedians who are entertaining us no end with their insight, their intellect, and their good-natured ribbing at all things Irish and whiskey and history. And these gentlemen, Kevin and Jason, are the hosts of Shite Talk, an Irish history podcast. Look, I've got Irish whiskey on the brain. And I would encourage everybody.
So they're recorded while on the whiskey, so it's apt.
Maybe not 2 pints of whiskey, but we're almost 2 pints in. But I encourage everybody to check out Shite Talk. You'll find it on Spotify and iTunes and Apple Podcasts, everywhere you'll find your podcasts, Libsyn, all kinds of places. Just Google Shite Talk Irish History Podcast and be sure and subscribe. And they'll see a big spike in their numbers, and then they'll come back again and talk to us and share more stories in the future. So be sure and subscribe. So we are talking tonight about Irish whiskey history stories, and we're sipping on whiskey, and we're kind of just going where the night goes because we're technically locked into a virtual pub.
Yes.
Right. So what have we touched on so far? We've talked about John L. Sullivan.
Yes.
We've talked about
Bushmills.
With the most famous piece of literature, second only to Ulysses, which was the story of the County Clare massacre. And all right, what is our next story that we must dive into?
Oh, we just recorded a couple of weeks ago before this an episode that hasn't been released yet, but about one of the heirs to the Jameson whiskey family.
Which one?
Which one? Well, we'll go with the radio one.
Okay, good.
Yes,
we can move on to the next one after that.
We'll keep listen. Sure, we'll see how this one goes, and if you want us to talk about the other one, we can.
I would just want to give a heads up before we get into the second one of what of my disassociation with not just ye, but even this very live stream and stories and sips entirely.
I've actually never been to Ireland. I've no idea what's happening. I've never heard of these fellas before.
All the views are my own and not that of my podcast employer.
So we were doing a bit of research into John Jameson, who founded the Jameson and Sons distillery in Dublin in the 1780s, and like for some reason I don't know why, but when I looked into this, I kind of thought I'd always had it in the back of my head that like Jameson had accidentally stumbled across whiskey in his bathtub. Like he was some guy from Dublin who'd just like taken a pint of bathwater while he was having a long soak and was like, "This is class." Where in reality, he was I think he was a rich lawyer from Scotland who'd come over and like had worked in distilleries and set up a thing, which makes so much more sense. But up until
his brothers or someone in law with him was from the dynasty of Hague.
Yeah. His wife was a Hague. Was a Hague. Yeah.
His wife was a Hague, and it like that makes so much more sense as to how you get into the distillery business. Because I guess we were talking about earlier on, like it is very much something that you need to have a lot of money and put a lot of investment into. We haven't covered the journalistic efforts of the Tayman just yet, but we'll have an episode.
Edition.
I know we all it was the Boston Strong Boy this week. We're not doing the Boston Tea Party.
We got to do the Boston Tayman at some stage, but anyway, like Johnny Jameson, he set up the distillery. That's in the 1780s. And what we'd done the story about was one of his sons was called Andrew, who set up a separate Jameson distillery in Enniscorthy, which is in Wexford. And he married a woman called Margaret Milner, and they lived in Daphne Castle on the outskirts of Wexford. So I don't know if you know anything about that distillery battery, or is there many...
Now who's having trouble pronouncing things in Ireland? Do you want to go back and put an X into Wexford, Kevin, and not just a WS?
Westford.
Westford. You know, I think it's over beside Mayo somewhere.
What's west of Wexford? It's Westford. But I don't know. Is there any?
Yes, I'm familiar with this endeavor. It didn't last very long. It had financial troubles. Not all the Jamesons were successful. There was a number of Jamesons that went into distilling. Some made it big, like John Jameson, William Jameson. Some flamed out very quickly. John Jameson would have been the one that, and his sons, incidentally, so many of John Jameson's sons and grandsons and great-grandsons were called John as well. So it's tough to kind of piece who was who. But yeah, the Wexford one didn't last very long, but they tried.
No, and like they had the Daddy Jameson money to lay back on, and he'd married into royalty. Basically, they were living in a castle, so things couldn't go too wrong for them. But the two of them had several children.
People, Kevin, who live in castles that would disagree with that. I live in a castle. Nothing can go wrong.
It's actually class. You'd be surprised how cheap it is to upkeep a castle these days. You know, the heating not as high as you'd think. But they had several children, as was the style at the time. Some of them survived past the age of 6, but one of them was a woman called Annie. And at the age of 19, Annie Jameson headed over to Bologna, which is in modern day Italy. But I think this is in like the 1860s when Italy was trying to decide whether it wanted to become Italy or not. It was a load of different states. So she went over to war-torn Bologna. I think it was flipping between French ownership, the Papal territories, Austria, and then trying to be part of Italy. But when she was there, she was staying with a family, and the family introduced her to their son-in-law. And I found one reference to the fact that it was like their ex-son-in-law. In turn, like their daughter, I suppose, had died, and they had the son-in-law hanging around. Either way, it seems sort of strange to have like a Erasmus student, I guess, or whatever the American equivalent would be, like a student from abroad staying with you, and then just to be like, here's our old son-in-law. He's still hanging around. He used to be dating our daughter, but now she's dead, so I guess we could match you two up. She was 19. I guess he was in like his 30s, but that was normal enough for the time. She went back home to her parents, back to Jameson, and asked for permission to marry him. They said no because she was too young, but they kept in touch anyway. And then at some point, they either eloped or they got consent to marry. It was only within a year or two, but they got married anyway when she was probably about 21. And in 1874, they gave birth to their second son that they named Guillermo Marconi, who went on to invent the radio, which is the founding blocks of how we're communicating with each other today.
Yeah, and how
if it wasn't for whiskey
to America.
If it wasn't for whiskey, which is, and again, before I started researching this story, again, I thought like Marconi invented the radio. I thought he was just in the shed hobbling together bits of wire and stones and accidentally stumbled across. I don't know why I think all great inventions from the past are just from like the common man.
Just like that's ever happened is just like I stumbled upon it. I picked up this touchscreen thing, attached a phone to it.
It makes much more sense that it's people that came from rich aristocracy, people who could afford to go and toy around with like the new inventions of induction coils, rather than people who had to live their lives.
As opposed to people sitting in the bath with induction coils, sticking them together, wondering what's going to happen, and we never hear of these people. They don't tend to last, or last through history.
Sure. Will I create the battery? Will I create the new radio? Will I die?
At the dice roll the head.
So if it wasn't for whiskey, we wouldn't be here for a number of reasons. But yes, Marconi is one of those reasons. And it is a fascinating story, actually. And Ireland, not just the Jameson money, plays a big role in Marconi and his telegraph company because of the locations where he built his big transmitting stations on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And
he set up a lot of things then in Cork. I was going to say not too far from you, but I was saying before we started recording, I had the luxury of going on a cycling tour of Cork this summer, and it was the first time I've understood the concept of West Cork in my life. I've always heard the term. My brother's been living down in Cork for the last couple of years, and I've always heard the term West Cork bandied around, but I never understood like how much that meant. Like Cork is tiny. West Cork, you're all really serious about West Cork.
It's bigger than both of our counties combined.
Yes.
People from West Cork would never say they're from Cork.
Exactly. Yeah, I never understood that, but as soon as we started,
is that why the podcast is called West Cork?
Probably.
That the Sophie Toscan de Plantier murder mystery podcast on Audible.
I'm pretty sure it's called that because of the terrible circumstances of where her murder occurred, as opposed to some tourism related.
Well, it's dark tourism now, Barry. That's going to bring in a whole new level of tourists to Cork. People who are going to completely skip the city and Cove and go straight over to wherever that happened. But,
that is an astonishing podcast, though. That is an incredible audiobook series. Listen to. Yeah.
It is, yeah. It's actually I'd listen to it while I was over here as a way to like touch back base with Ireland, and I'd be like, well, it's actually terrible. It's like I was like, I just want to nostalgia. I just want to feel back home, and then you listen to a murder mystery podcast. You're like, well, this is not what I wanted. I wanted like something nice and superfluous. And like, no, like very seriously. Turns out our Gardaí were as corrupt as like the FBI. Only like. It's crazy.
I think incompetent is the word.
Sure, but Kieran Quinn had a very good point there about people outside of Cork do not care as much about Cork as people.
Worry about Kieran Quinn. Kieran Quinn's from Tipperary, and you got to cling on to something, and what he clings on to is the his disgust at Cork rather than his promotion of Tipperary.
Sure, it's much easier to naysay other counties than to do anything yourself ever. Sure, they invented hurling back 120 years ago.
Don't get them started.
They're the only county to decide that they needed 2 different license plates. Everyone else may do it one, but oh no, not good enough for Tip.
Would you not know how long that county is? You couldn't be driving from north to south in anything less than 3 days, so you need separate license plates.
Sure, God, if the Gardaí pulled over someone from Tip, they'd need to know whether they're north or south before they decided to let them go or fine them.
So Guglielmo Marconi got all his money, his Jameson money. He set up his company. He created telegraphs and the ability to telegraph between wirelessly transmit for the first time between long distances, and to tie this back further to Cork. One of the first global uses of his technology, which was being pioneered, which was being rolled out mostly and found to be of most use, was on ships, transatlantic ships for communication. But in 1912, the Titanic used the Marconi telegraph to share Morse code SOS, which would have been one of the first kind of globally known stories about the use of this.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd seen that said at a few times, but I think at that stage he'd fairly established himself.
Was he? Okay.
But I think the Titanic was sort of 1912 was a big demonstration of how, I suppose it was the biggest catastrophe of its time until World War One overshadowed it. But thanks to Marconi's telegraph, this saved a lot of people. I can't remember the name of the ship that was near them, but they managed to communicate with them. But I like, Barry, there that you'd sort of tied in the Marconi story to the Titanic and Cork. You forgot to mention Cork was the last place that the Titanic sailed out of.
She was grand when she left Cork.
Kevin, it was
grand when it left Belfast. That's what I've heard. It was the boys in Cork.
It's left, really. Like, don't leave it alone. Leave Cork alone. We've got a large listenership from Cork, and I'm not willing to see that. I don't want to lose.
And you have a host who's got control of the buttons here, and who stays on the chat and who doesn't. Who's from Cork.
Wasn't Cove known as Queenstown for a while there, Barry? I don't know.
The proud Irishmen in Cove, in the County Council of Cove, in 1847, decided they would do the most patriotic thing they knew how to do, which was to rename the town in honor of Queen Victoria, who herself starved the nation of its corn and its maize. And God love us, the only way we could repay her would be to name the town after her.
Yes, yeah. What,
don't get me started.
No,
actually, we call Roy Keane's town. We'll just change it up straight away.
Yes,
I remember going to see Roy Keane come back to Cove when he used to play for Nottingham Forest and play against his original team, Cove Ramblers. And I remember as he was coming off the field, he took his shoelace out of one of his shoes and he handed it to me. And I said, "What am I supposed to do with this?"
I don't even have shoes. What good is it?
Your hopes and dreams in this, Roy, because you've abandoned your town, you've abandoned your people.
He's given you something to look forward to in the future, Barry. He's given you a lace saying, if in the future you could, hope to maybe own some boots and pull yourself up by their straps.
At that stage, I was barefoot, and for many years after, I was barefoot, and this was a dream to have a portion of a shoe in my hand. I had a shoelace. But Kieran Quinn says that Tipperary never had English names in their towns, and he's completely forgetting about horse and jockey.
Yeah, exactly, which is how we started off about an hour ago. That's as English as it gets. There's no Irish name for that.
Kieran Quinn sounding pretty tip contrary to me.
But yes, the Titanic and Cove and Queenstown, but like that's a whole other kettle of fish and story.
Well, on the Marconi thing, I can't remember the name of so it would have been, was it Crookshaven? A very westerly point where they reckon Crookhaven.
Yeah. Mount Joya, I believe they call it today, Kevin.
But it was, it's like mad to picture. But so we ended up in the research for it. I was reading about a man called, I can't remember his first name. I think it was Thomas Reuters, but he was a Prussian citizen as it was at the time. Who went on to form like a news company, which is still running today as like Reuters. They'd be up there with Bloomberg as like the people who provide stock market news and just news in general. But this came from a man in the 1840s, 50s called blank Reuters. I think it was Thomas Reuters. But there was like companies in London who were like vying for information. And obviously the only way to get information from America at the time was just to meet someone from a ship and have them tell you what had happened in America. You bring that to London, you put it into the press and send it off. So the closer you could get to that information, it gave you an edge on having news on your competitors. And Reuters cut out the middleman and ended up setting up, a lot of people apparently had newspaper bases set up in Skibbereen, and Reuters set his up in Crookhaven and would send people on boats out to meet the ships coming over from America. So things like the Lincoln assassination, the outcome of the Civil War, like updates in the Civil War, whatever, would all come across on passenger ships who were coming into Cork. Someone would row out, get information off them, back, hop on a train, back to Skibbereen. The first person to get the news to London or to Cork City basically won. And when Marconi set up his telegraph towers out in Crookhaven, that just was another advance in that. Suddenly they could communicate with ships offshore, get the information back to Cork, back to London, and then send it out to folks as they came in.
And that's not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, if you think of it, like compared to where we are today and the technology we have. Yeah. Do you think that's what you did? Like,
yeah, it's mad to think of Cork being the epicenter of news at any stage
or anything, right?
or anything really.
It was the cultural capital of Europe there for a year back in the
Yeah. It was the point where it was the first. If you were coming from America or from South America into Europe, the first safe harbor was seen as Crookhaven or like Skibbereen, if you had to.
Bad Lieutenant Port of Call, Crookhaven.
Yeah.
Cork, known for many years as like the saddest town in Ireland because of all the immigration that if you're Irish in America, the chances are that your ancestors left Ireland through Cove, which probably was at the time, and so it was the saddest town in Ireland for many years. And we blamed immigration for that. It was just sad generally, but we blamed immigration for it being sad.
Listen, I've drank in Rob Roy's pub in Cove, and I've had as good a time there as I've had anywhere.
Would it have been as good a time as in the Horse and Jockey?
I scratched that. I've had as good a time in Rob Roy's in Cove, bar that one pint I had in the Horse and Jockey.
Padraig says, let's not forget the Skibbereen Eagle, keeping an eye on the world.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. One of the stalwart newspapers of the
Skippers were what is it, the Donnelly, or what's the rowers, the Olympians?
Yes, boys.
Yeah, because it was only this week, Monday or Tuesday this week, someone had referenced them to be that was, I don't know how it comes over, like how that, like, what's that, 4 or 5 years ago now, like that Olympics, and it's still popping up, that interview where they're like, pull like a dog. We just go in there and we lie down and we pull like a dog. And
Donovan Brothers.
Donovan Brothers.
This week, someone was referencing that to me. I was like, that is 4 to 5 years old at least. I think that was the 2016 Olympics.
Yeah,
but great for them. And like, I don't know of any other rowers. It's just them.
It's amazing. Like,
great Cork representatives. Like,
I can't remember the two boys' names, but I remember it was an interview with one of them after the like pull like a dog one, and there's just one of them by himself, and someone's interviewing them, and they're like, "How are you getting on now? You must be feeling amazing. You've just won a medal for Ireland." And he's like, "Yeah, it's grand, yeah, but himself is after going through, he's after doing the drug test there, so he's away drinking pints now. I have my second drug test now in half an hour, so I can't drink now or anything, or else I won't be able to get tested." And they're like, "Well, oh, it must be great though. You must feel really proud." He's like, "Yeah, the whole of Skibbereen's out partying. The whole town's shut down. No one's going to work now on Tuesday. The whole part. I'm stuck here like a fool, in Egypt waiting for drug test to go in. The brother's away up. He's drinking pints already. I have to wait around here for my test now before I can have a pint. No, it's grand, I suppose, the medal and all, but everyone's back home having a fun time, and I'm stuck here waiting. It's yourself."
Do you think that they could have got away with that? Even just one of the brothers could have been injecting themselves, and the other one does 2 tests.
Yeah. I was going to say, for American audience, you reckon they just like put a subtitle underneath being like, "Everything's fine."
Yeah.
Happy to be happy with the result.
Well, actually, speaking of West Cork, that podcast, they do that within the first about 5 minutes of the first episode, where at some point they're like, "Right, we were interviewing people in pubs. We're going to translate this for you." And it's like, it's just drunken Irish people talking, but even I was pretty happy that they translated it. I was like, I'm not getting offended by this, and anyone who does get offended by it is being ridiculous, because it's nearly.
I'm from Cork. Like, I'd have trouble listening. I'd have trouble understanding some of those lads from Cork. Like, and I grew up near them. Like, but it's a different language altogether.
It is the strongest accent, I would say, that I've experienced on the country. Like, I know we have a sort of reputation amongst ourselves as being diverse in our accents, but Cork, like, you genuinely are entering into a different dialect down there, because it's so big, I suppose. What's the famous thing about, like, is it if you're driving from Kinsale to Dublin, what county would you be in when you're halfway from Kinsale to Dublin?
Is it still in Cork?
It's still Cork, yeah.
Sure, that's a bit like Texas. If you could drive for 12 hours and you're still in Texas.
Yeah, it's not as impressive as Texas. Where you're kind of like, is it 6 or 7 Irelands fit into Texas? Something along the lines. It's absolutely massive. We'd go on. I've gone on, like, when I'm working over here, I'm a filmmaker, and we'd go on shoots down to Houston, and that's, Houston or Dallas are about 4 or 5 hours away for the most part once you're stopping for petrol and that. And you go down and do a 10-hour day shoot and then drive back. And people from Texas are just so conditioned to it. They're like, "Oh yeah, sure, we're going to the next place. For 5 hours is nothing." I'm like, that is the length of my country.
Yeah.
There's no way to live, is it? There's no way to live in the grand scheme of things like that. That's kind of size. We wouldn't be used to that. We wouldn't be conditioned for it.
No, there's so much nothingness in between that I've kind of like, I don't, obviously there's farmland and stuff, but there's so much in between that's just, it's like oil pump, McDonald's, a church, oil pump, McDonald's, a church, and that's basically it for about 4 hours.
A few horses, a few cattle.
If you're times they've all three of them put into one institution.
My favorite insult, though, like my favorite insult from in America comes from Texas, and it's the ultimate slur you could bestow upon a man. If he was kind of like, in Ireland we might say he's a bit of a chancer, like, but in Texas they might say he's all hat and no cattle, and I think that's a lovely description.
That's great, yeah.
I'd say he's all heart and no poo.
Let me get a drop. I'm going to get an ice cube for this, lads, because when I mentioned on Twitter earlier that I was going to be drinking this the Silkie whiskey, the man himself owns the distillery, said put a bit of ice into it and you'll like it even better. So I'm going to grab a bit of ice from the freezer there.
This is you're leaving Shite Talk to run the live stream. This is
stories and sips
at your own risk, Barry. At your own risk. Well, Kevin, go on. Let's.
Well, I've seen Barry. He's got the headphones in there now, so he's walking around the kitchen. I'd say at the minute, scrambling for an ice cube, waiting.
He's running. I hear him running now. He's like, I can't leave these lads on the stream too long on the road.
I'll point to. If anyone's looking behind me here, I know Jason's representing the Irish flag or the Côte d'Ivoire behind him. I've got one of our patron saints of the country here, photograph behind me, Mr. Colin Meaney.
From Con Air fame.
Yes, famous to many of the American audience, I suppose, as the he's an FBI agent in Con Air who doesn't believe in John Cusack's hippie notions, despite the overwhelming amount of evidence to the fact that cons have taken over this airplane.
No, so his apprehension in the movie is the fact that there's a prisoner who could be a good man. Because the John Cusack comes to him and says, "Oh, sorry, I was."
Oh, we've got a man on the inside. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
On air last week. I've watched it twice in the past 2 weeks. Same as The Rock.
You watched it right after The Rock. Yes. Yeah.
I always do those back to back, and then if I have the energy, I'll watch Face Off.
Because apparently, was it Face Off in Con Air or The Rock in Con Air that Nick Cage went one from one set to the other?
I think it's Con Air. No, I think it's Con Air and. Maybe I'm not sure. Just Nicolas Cage
is on Con Air and Face Off.
Maybe. And you're not forgetting about Star Trek for Colin Meaney as well, which would be very familiar to folks.
Yes.
Not as important to me. Not for most of the world, and that's how everyone's going to know him. I know him as the FBI agent who runs across an abandoned airfield, screaming that's my Porsche been attached to because the Cusack is it he attaches or is it? I think it is Cusack. Yeah, because he doesn't like Meaney, so he attaches his car. He steals his car. Then drives it to the airport, attaches it to the plane, and then when Meaney gets there in another car, they see the plane take off, and he's like, "Is that my Porsche?"
Yeah.
Flying away in the air. It's just such a great film.
Chris Conner is dead right there. It's the father from The Commitments.
That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the Barry's
trilogy. Yeah, the Van Snapper. He's the only man in all. He's the only person in all three movies.
He is, but because we watched the Barristan trilogy, and I kind of thought he had a more central role in all. He's barely in The Commitments. Yes, he has a side job in the chipper van. He's the main character, arguably, in the van.
Yeah, Italian.
He was staying at a hotel I worked in years ago. Back in my hotel management days when I was a young gassour, and he stayed in the hotel, and I was working behind the bar, and Colin Meaney walked in, and I'd have known him from the Roddy Doyle movies.
Yeah.
He sat at the bar anyway, poured him a pint of Guinness, quiet fella, sipping his pint of Guinness, and some Yahoo spots it's Colin Meaney, Irish lad sees it's Colin Meaney, and he gets up. He's kind of on his way out the door anyway, and he turns to Colin Meaney and he goes, "Beam me up, Scotty." Colin Meaney just stares at him, and he looks back at me and he goes, "For fuck's sake." I'd say well used to it,
He's all the time. I mean, especially because Star Trek, I'm not, I didn't grow up with Star Trek or Star Wars. Moving to America, I realized that they're giant things over here. But that's how everyone here knows Colin Meaney. I'm No, it's everything else. It's like those small films from Ireland that you've never heard about or seen before. That's why he's famous.
In Bruges would be another big one for him, I suppose, internationally.
Layer cake as well.
Layer cake, he was very good in that. That's right.
In Bruges, Kevin. I will correct you on that.
Sorry. Yes, I'm forever mixing him up with Brendan Gleeson. I want another picture of Brendan Gleeson over here on this wall so I can point
What's the movie with
Brendan right.
and Pat Short? Is it The Guard? Is that the one? Is the movie where he plays the guard in the west of Ireland?
Calvary, the priest movie.
Calvary, yeah.
Okay.
Short's the barman behind and he walks in. At some point, he's drunk and he has a problem, so he takes out a pistol and starts shooting all the bottles of whiskey around the place. And then once he's out of bullets, Pat Short just pulls up this baton. He's like a baseball bat, basically, going like, "There's no more bullets left now, so this is the only thing that's going to do damage."
Very good. Lads, I'm drinking this. The third whiskey that I said I drink tonight is a peated whiskey. So I don't know if you've ever tried what would be known as kind of like a smoky peated whiskey. Scotland has a few. Ireland hasn't had so many over the years. We're having more come on the market now. But this one is from Sleeve League Distillers up in Donegal. And they source this whiskey because they're still building their distillery. But this is called the legendary Silkie. And the Silkie itself is a great story about these kind of shapeshifters in Donegal that come out of the water and create all kinds of havoc. But it's an interesting one. It's just found its way to the United States. And it's getting great reviews. It's got an older or kind of a more peated sibling called the legendary Dark Silkie, but this is just the legendary Silkie. So for those who are following along from the whiskey side of things, it's a blend of two different single malts, a double distilled single malt and a triple distilled single malt, and soft grain whiskey with a small hint of peated malt. So the peat is very light on this, and it's bottled at 46% ABV, which is higher than you'd find a regular entry-level whiskey, which would normally be 40 to 43%. And James Doherty, the owner of the distillery, said, put a bit of ice into it, and it'll go down a treat. And it's lovely, actually. It's I'm not a huge peated fan historically, but I do like trying something new, and I wouldn't have thought to put the ice cube in it. But it does kind of numb the overpowering smoke and give it a nice little balance. It's actually very sweet whiskey. I don't know if anyone's following along with the Silkie, but a few comments are.
I'd been meaning to ask you, Barry, because obviously Irish whiskey, I'm going to say like I'm knowledgeable. I Googled this in advance. But so I always see it says it's triple distilled. So that's like Irish whiskey is triple distilled. And then seemingly like Scottish whiskey is double distilled, which makes us 33% better, I believe. But it always says that the triple distilling makes it overproof. Like it's a stronger whiskey. But for the most part, most Irish whiskies that I see tend to be 40%. So if you could explain that to me.
I will. So there's a lot of great myths around Irish whiskey, and the tour guides in the distillery will take great pleasure in telling you that we distill in Ireland 3 times, which is 1 time more than the Scots, so that we're 33% better or whatever it might be. But Irish whiskey has, for the past 200 years, traditionally been distilled 3 times, but it doesn't have to be. So by law, you can distill twice. So every time you distill, distillation, just by its name, is reducing the quantity of liquid and then increasing its alcohol by volume. And as you do that, you're taking across certain flavors, you're leaving others behind. So when you triple distill, you're arriving at a spirit that has a different complexity or profile than one that's double distilled. But look, like the Cooley distillery would be double distillation. Middleton distillery is triple distillation. Sleeve League distilling, I think theirs is going to be double distillation as far as I know. But in any case, it's not so much to do with the proof, because when you double distill or triple distill, what comes out the other end is a spirit that's anywhere from 60% to 75% alcohol by volume at the other end. And then that gets brought down a little bit by water, gets put into the casks, matured for a minimum of 3 years. And even then, once it comes out the other end of those casks, it's still typically at an alcohol by volume that's too high for a couple of reasons. One is the whiskey business is a delicate dance between the chief financial officer, the marketing team, and the blenders. And they're all trying to find what's the right balance, because the higher the proof, the higher the tax you'll pay to the government. So 40% is actually the lowest by law you can bottle a whiskey and call it Irish whiskey. Anything less than that would be a liqueur. So if you're going for mass market, mass production, you'll try and produce at the lowest ABV. And that way you'll get more for your buck. You'll be able to keep the price lower. And so you'll find your entry-level Bushmills, Tullamore Dew, Jameson, Paddy, Powers will all be bottled at 40%. It's not necessarily because that's the best flavor. It's because that's what they deemed to be the best balance between flavor and economies.
It's the Irish of this, that we're looking for the best price point. What's the best way to get away from the tax man? And then we'll base our taste off of that.
Exactly.
Our taste is not spending money on tax.
No, Jesus, no. Yeah. And and the funny story like that would be a great old story for the old the podcast yourselves if you're ever short on content is the origin of the unique style of Irish whiskey called pot still whiskey. So like Kevin's got the green spot whiskey there, which is what's called a single pot still whiskey. And that's as a result that style of whiskey was created as a result of taxation by the British, mostly. Back in the 1700s, there was a tax imposed by the British called the Malt tax. And at the time, the British were kind of busy fighting battles all around the world, building the British Empire. And that's an expensive business with warships and taking over countries. And so the British, who of course were the Irish overlords at the time, saw how much whiskey we were producing in Ireland. And they decided to slap a tax on the Irish who were making the whiskey. But rather than slapping a tax on whiskey, they actually slapped a tax on malted barley. And the Irish at the time were making all their whiskey with malted barley. So they decided, Jesus, if there's two things they didn't like at the time, the first was the British and the second was taxes. So they decided to find a way around it. So they wanted to keep making whiskey. So instead, they decided to reduce the amount of malted barley that went into their whiskey and instead put in unmalted barley out of the fields, raw, and mix the two together and see if they could still have a flavorful whiskey at the other end. And what turned out as a result of that experiment was a style of whiskey that was a little bit spicier, a little bit creamier, and had a unique profile. And it was so successful and so enjoyed that even after the British repealed the tax a few years later, the Irish kept making it, and it was that good. So to this day, single pot still whiskey would be the style that the quintessential kind of style of Irish whiskey that's unique to Ireland, more or less. And it's got a great old story to it.
Kevin missed most of that, and he probably missed my question as well. So don't even bother trying to pretend like you know what we're talking about, Kevin.
You can watch the replay tomorrow. It's available on Facebook and YouTube.
a great plug there. I figured like so it was a tax put on Irish style of whiskey making in the 1790s.
Yeah, so you were sharing some stats back and forth with me during the week about how many distilleries were in Ireland at different times, and back in the 1700s and early 1800s, that was kind of the peak of Irish whiskey production. 1700s was all the whiskey they were making was malt whiskey, just barley, where you take the barley out of the field, you steep it in water in a dark room, you trick it into thinking it's springtime, so it starts to sprout, and then you dry it out. That's the malting process that exposes the sugars, the carbohydrates. And when you add the yeast, then it turns into alcohol. But that 100% malted barley is like typically what you think single malt whiskey is, just malted barley, 100% malted barley. So the English taxed the Irish who were making it that way too, and the Irish then said, no, we'll reduce the amount of malted barley, we'll avoid the tax, and they turned out to make a better whiskey, which Green Spot, the one you're drinking, is the only single pot still whiskey that has been in continuous production for the last 100 odd years. Yeah, it's survived ups and downs.
From a tradition dating to 1805, I'm reading from the bottle.
Yeah,
it comes in the inspiration from Green Spot single pot still Irish whiskey.
Now, so it's Yellow Spot. That's the same company. Is that still the same way, or now we're just getting on to whiskey questions instead of me talking about buying a whiskey fire in Dublin in 1875?
This is what Barry had wanted all along: questions about whiskey and less questions.
2.5 hours in, we're finally getting to talk about whiskey. This is brilliant.
Just what's this stuff we've been drinking, Barry? It's I don't know. It sounds good. What do you make of that?
It's after taking the paint off the walls. What is it? Yeah, Yellow Spot is a single pot still whiskey as well. It's aged for longer. It's aged for 12 years. Green Spot will be aged for about 7 to 10 years. And then what will be different about Yellow Spot, it's actually a different style of pot still whiskey. You make different styles of that whiskey in Middleton, and then it would be aged in different casks. Green Spot will be aged in bourbon casks, sherry casks, and then Yellow Spot will be aged in bourbon casks, sherry casks, but also Malaga casks as well. Isn't it Malaga for yellow spot? Yeah, Malaga casks.
What would be a Malaga other than a southern town in Spain?
So you have a whole range of wines that come from different parts of Europe, typically named for their region or for their town. So the likes of sherry comes from the Sherry or Jerez region of Spain, and that's just a fortified wine, which is a wine made from local grapes, where you add in a high alcohol brandy to increase its alcohol content, preserve it a little bit for travel, like transportation. Years ago, it would have helped the wine not spoil on long journeys overseas as it was being transported. But it also stops the yeast from eating the sugars, so it keeps it as a sweeter wine. So these fortified wines like sherry, which comes from Spain, port, which comes from the Porto region of Portugal, Madeira comes from the islands of Madeira off the coast of Africa, Malaga comes from Africa, and they're all just local fortified wines that the wines that are stored in these casks, once those casks are emptied, the distilleries in Ireland will use those casks to further mature their whiskey and soak in some of the flavors that have come from the fortified wine that was in them before.
Yeah.
Which is, I'll say now that that's far more information that's 100% correct than anything you'll ever find in our podcast. That was like, oh, I'll tell you now. I'll tell you exactly how it is. You're like, oh, we don't do that. No, that's not a thing. You've researched stuff and remembered it.
But there's a great story to those lads. The lads behind the Spot Whiskies, the Mitchell family, they're still doing business in Dublin. Mitchell and Son is a wine merchant. They have they're down in the IFSC now. They have a shop there. But they when you see it dating back to 1805, their ancestors were it was a baker originally that came over to Ireland and over time started buying whiskey from the Jameson distillery in Dublin when they were distilling in Dublin and started aging it in their cellars. And the reason these whiskies are called green spot, yellow spot, red spot is that back when they were aging the whiskey in their cellars, their cellarmen and the labourers at the time would have been illiterate Irishmen who couldn't have read how old the whiskey should have been or how long they wanted to age it for. So they just gave the workers buckets of paint. And so if the whiskey was supposed to age for 7 to 10 years, they'd give them a bucket of green paint. For 12 years, yellow paint. And for 15 years, red paint. And they put a daub of paint on the end of the barrel. And those then became known as the spots, or the spot range of whiskies. So each color kind of represents an age statement for the whiskey.
Ah, Christ, makes sense. That's
remember colors and numbers.
It's fascinating, but also kind of at the same time kind of sad that we couldn't count.
Sure.
Here's an bucket of paint, a bucket of stuff. Go in there, throw that on the side.
We went on the green, yellow, red thing. Well, what before Jason disparaged,
you mean the Carlo color? We went by the green. We went by the
green, yellow, red.
Before Jason disparaged the research we do
whiskey
on for our podcast, I was going to talk about when you're saying about Malaga. We'd done an episode recently about a famous Corkonian, Mary Elms, who did a lot of good charity work over in Malaga during the various world wars. But then when she started talking about traffic lights, I went on to a much more concise and interesting story about I think it was a traffic light it was somewhere in like New York State or upstate New York.
Oh yeah, I know the story.
Do you know the story? Yeah, and it was I think it was something. Actually, it could be related to Tipperary.
Don't be mentioned. They've got enough to say for themselves already.
Well, it's well, I don't know if it's good or bad. I'll let the listeners decide for themselves. I think it was some borough in New York that was named after Tipperary. A lot of Irish immigrants ended up moving there, and they had a traffic light in the borough. Traditional traffic light: green, go; yellow, wait; red, stop. But it was, I guess the American traffic lights are red, yellow, green. And the people of this new Irish immigrant borough took umbrage with the fact that the red for stop, also the red for the British Empire, was above the green for go and the green for Ireland. So they kept throwing stones at the traffic light to the point where I don't know how long it took. Yes, John.
Ritko has it.
Ritko is just written in Tip Hill in Syracuse. the green light is on top. They kept throwing stones at the light up until the point where, like, the county council or whatever they had in New York kept coming out and replacing the light to go red, yellow, green, just like every other light in the goddamn country. But lads kept throwing stones at it and breaking it because they didn't want the British red to be above the Irish green, until the point where they did eventually, at some stage, flip it upside down, so that the green was on top. So it goes.
I was going to say that's a very easy fix.
It's not an easy fix, but like
upside down.
But what I'd read about, well, first of all, how are you going to be the only? Because a lot of time, and I know for myself, a lot of times when I'm driving, it's absent-mindedly, and if all of a sudden a traffic light was flipped upside down, that wouldn't end well. But also colorblind people, if you can't distinguish between,
I don't think they can drive.
Green, I think they can, Jason. They're not. But if you're basing your assumption on if it's the bottom light that goes flash, 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 I drive through this crossroad. If it's not, I stay where I am. If for some reason there's one crossroad in the state, nay, the country, that's been turned upside down because some local lads from Tip couldn't understand the idea of red being above green.
Well, it's the most petty.
That's not your fault, no.
It is a challenge, I'm sure, for those who are colorblind, but what a wonderful representation of the Irish pettiness that not even the green light in a traffic light can be underneath or subservient to a red light.
It makes zero sense, and yet we will literally endanger. I mean, like if people who are colorblind are driving through that crossroads, it's the young Irish kids that they're going to hit. But we will put as many young Irish lives on the line as it takes to make that light the correct way around in our eyes.
Well, here's a question for you. Here's one for you now. So this is the only upside down traffic light in America. Do you know in London, in England, there's only one road in England where you can drive on the other side of the road legally? Do you know where that road is?
Oh, God. Is this driving the other side of the road legally?
Is it Piccadilly Circus?
No, but it's close.
Oh, sorry. I'm getting that confused with the way they gave out to me that time.
You tried that on them when they pulled you over for speeding down the wrong side of the road. I don't know. Where would they? Outside the Indian embassy?
No. Random, but no.
It's a close flag to ours, in fairness. It's a similar.
But I was thinking of all the places they've made listen to their rules. Like most of the world, because America is the opposite side of the road than we have now.
Yeah.
But
so in England, you drive on the left. We drive on the left in England. There's one street
in Australia and New Zealand.
There's one street in England where you can legally drive on the right.
No, I don't know. What is it?
Brexit Street?
It is off the Strand in London, the street that leads into the Savoy Hotel. And that street allows you to drive on the right because in order for the women to alight from the carriages without the danger of being knocked down by another carriage coming the other direction, the carriage drives up and drops them on the right-hand side at the hotel. So it comes in off the Strand on the right-hand side, drops them off, they get out the right-hand side of the coach and straight into the Strand Hotel, and the coach drives off again. And it's the only street in England that's legally allowed to do that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
We've never heard of that before. We're both concerned, and you can tell by our silence.
Well, in 2017, which is 4 years ago at this stage, I bought a van in Aberdeen in Scotland, in northern Scotland. Yeah. I drove it from there to Tehran in Iran. I did, and across many different countries and many different driving zones. And the only place I drove on the wrong side of the road was Edinburgh, which drives on the same side of the road as Ireland. And it was in the first hour.
You were drunk at the time.
So I was. It's like I drove the length and breadth of Europe, never made a mistake once. The only time I got it wrong, I actually think I got it wrong on the way back as well in England. But the only two times I got it wrong was within the first hour and within the last, the last stretch of it. But both of the times in England where we drive on the same side of the road as we do at home. Everywhere else in Europe drives on the other side of the road. vivid memories of driving across a bridge in Edinburgh and with a load of oncoming traffic coming at me in a stereotypically Scottish way, annoyed at the fact that I was on the wrong side of the road, barreling towards them in a van.
You live to tell the tale, and you live to survive for a lock.
They didn't, but I did.
Yeah.
We have a question from Stephen here, and if anyone's got any questions for the lads on their podcast, Shite Talk, put it in the comments there. We won't be keeping them much longer because Jesus is very late in Ireland. But Stephen asks, is the mass-produced stuff considered to be crap, or is it considered to be decent, okay drinking? I can tell you that the mass-produced stuff in Ireland is Jameson, it's Tullamore Dew, it's Bushmills by mass-produced standards, and those are quality whiskies. There's no doubt about it. Like, if you told me I could only drink any one of those again for the rest of my life, I'd be perfectly happy. There really isn't a bad mass-produced whiskey in Ireland. There's just maybe ones that you don't really like or like as many as others. So, yeah, you can, while there's many to choose from now, I think there's more than 200 different brands of Irish whiskey you can choose from. You can't go wrong with a drop of the Jimmy or a drop of the Bushmills or a drop of the Tully.
It would have been. It's always been my dad's favorite whiskey. Just Jameson. Like Jemmy, he would just always go for Seamus. Shout out! He'll probably watch tomorrow. I assume he's asleep now. Yeah, it's always been. Oh my God! We just got a message about our tie-dye T-shirts. But we'll get on to that in a second.
I dropped a bottle of Jameson over to your dad for Christmas.
Yeah, you did. I told Kev I'm over here in Texas, so Kevin had messaged me saying I'm going to Carlo with his missus for a weekend holiday. They got an Airbnb.
You know yourself a romantic weekend away in Banglestown, Carlo.
Yeah, not really.
Woman, I'll say that. You know.
Yeah. Well, so he got my mother some chocolates and my dad a bottle of whiskey, and I was like, just get him Jameson. He's not going to want anything else. That's like, don't go getting something fancy because he'll hate it. It's like he doesn't want, because the second my dad gets a nicer whiskey, he tastes it and go, sure, I'm not going to drink that most of the time then. Like, now all I have is this taste of like quality stuff. What's the point? I just want his regular Jameson. It's like, that's what he's going for. He won't even go near a cask, mates. It's just like your general standard. But also, I'll say that Kevin, I told Kevin to get my mother some nice chocolates, and he got her a box of Quality Street, which I think for any Irish person is a slap in the face to a mother.
True. And I would also say that it's only a man like Jason that when his friend would go out of his way to buy a box of chocolates for his mother, that he would give out about the brand of chocolates that was bought.
And also never paid Kevin back for that.
No.
For that money.
Only in kind words.
Can we also talk about not only how ill-prepared you were for the shout-out to your friend, the musician, and where to send people, but how ill-prepared you were for the audience to purchase your shirts or support you in any way, in any meaningful way?
Now, no, Barry, what it is now is we have loads of the shirts, but the tie-dye shirts were a special run we were doing because my girlfriend, the same woman that I'd, lovingly treated to a all expenses paid trip to North Carlo.
Like just the worst idea in the world.
That same woman.
I love you, baby. Here's a voucher for €2 for pennies.
Yeah, I'll drive you half an hour down the road to Ireland's least celebrated county. Don't even bother covering the diesel. I already took it out of your credit account. We'll be there tomorrow. But so she said she'd tie-dye a couple of t-shirts for me because she has a proclivity for it. Very talented in the tie-dye department. But it takes a lot of time to tie-dye a t-shirt. And so I didn't want to rope her into doing too many of the damn things. She'd already given us a month of our time. And
now we do need to reference it, and I'll take this point to reference the fact that because the tie-dye t-shirts have become very popular over the regular t-shirts, which we were like pretty happy with. We were very happy to have, and they were selling well. And then as soon as the tie-dye shirts came out, everyone's like, "You can go feck yourselves." We're sending them back to get tie-dye. But it's the in future now, because that's become a very popular thing and everyone wants that, we are going to switch the price point, because for a while there it was the same price as now we're going to up the price for the tie-dye t-shirts, and all of the money is going to go to direct provision to
when we bring them back in again, we'll do it as a proper thing and do a proper give the extra amount to charity. But Johnny McNally was asking, do the regular ones come in XL? I don't think so. I think we just have an L.
They have one size of shirt. They have no tie-dye. They have no coffees to buy. They have no musicians to plug. You cannot give these guys money no matter what you do.
Here we are. We're out here looking like any good Irishman. We're out here looking for money in the claw. Yet we've
no way
prepared for it. We bought a load of t-shirts.
You wouldn't know how to take the money if it was thrown at you.
We wouldn't even have a hat to beg with.
I will promote her wares in that she made me this. I can't remember, was it for my birthday or for Christmas, but she made me a Kevlar vest, which is a Portman 2 of my first and second names, which I very much enjoyed. I don't know if it would appeal to the mass public, but
like I want one. But
yeah, of course. But myself and yourself will be wearing them. But so in answer to the public's questions,
it's
no
worse.
link to even find them, Tony. You're dead right.
Well, we should say then it's that Big Cartel Shite Talk. Put that into Google. Not even a reason anymore to put in the actual HTTP or www.
Website? No, have you no website?
Oh, we do here.
We're just really bad at saying it, Stephen.
Here we go. We'll put it up here now. I'm going to do your work for you because God knows you can't do it yourselves.
Is there a way that I can share a link here, Barry, or
you can send it to me. You can message me in the private comments there on the side.
Yes, there. There we go.
Here, look, I'm putting this up on the screen here for people. Big Shite Talk, Big Cartel. I'm also going to put this into the comments for people.
And now, if you go to that website, you can see the T-shirts that we have for sale, which are modeled by myself, and then the tie-dye T-shirts, which are, according to the people who've been buying them, much better. A limited run done by my girlfriend, lovingly and for free, who I let out of the obligation at the start of this month. I said, don't worry about it. It's Valentine's Day is coming up. My gift to you is that you no longer have to do these T-shirts. But by the sounds of it, Jason, she's back in the sweatshop.
Oh, she's like 100%. That she is like.
You got to buy her some Quality Street.
We're going to need about 100 tie-dye T-shirts per day.
If she really loves me, she'll get back to work ASAP. So listen.
If she really loves you, she'll be working on them while listening to this live stream.
I can only imagine she's at this moment.
She's firing up the sewing machine right now. And to the audience who are rushing to buy all of these shirts, we thank you for your support, but we remind you to save some of your money for Stories and Sips shirts. As opposed to
we should also we shouldn't hijack the podcast going.
No, I'm really joking. This is a very supportive community.
I was really enjoying the Stories and Sips glasses that you had there in the opening. They're very, very.
Oh, yes.
I hadn't seen them before now, and I saw them earlier on. I was like, well, how do you? It's probably not possible to send it to Kevin because I don't like him. But you can probably find. I could probably get one over to Austin. That's in the same country.
We'll get you a glass.
Well, now,
unlike me, I actually have a website with links and places to buy things. So, yeah.
I was going to say, if a man wanted to buy a Stories and Sips glass, how would he do it?
He would go to storiesandsIps.com and click on the shop button, and would be taken to the online store. But
it's so straightforward.
It's very straightforward, but don't worry about Stories and Sips tonight. The audience is very supportive of everything we do. Tonight they should support you guys and fund the immigrants' return to Ireland, perhaps the trip back to Ireland or the trip for the Irishmen to America. Maybe you can reverse roles in time.
Well, at this stage, it seems more likely that we would get gigs in America if I just went over there at some point this year.
Tony Nicoletti has been back on to us again saying, well, they don't have shirts larger than large, which we did just say, to be fair, but we didn't. When we planned on making the T-shirts, we bought Kevin, do you know the name of the company in Dublin? I haven't been around for that.
It's East Wall T-shirt Productions.
Yeah, great company. They were great to work with. Super high quality. Great. Yeah, see, we can do something like 1 out of every 10 shout outs gets a reference.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with us or our social media, any of like our friends, out of the way you can support us, but like the people who make us t-shirts. You can't get a link to our t-shirts, but we'll tell you about who makes our t-shirts.
Made them, yeah.
Brilliant. You get all the useless, irrelevant side information about the t-shirts, but you can't have one.
But we're bad at it. We're comedians. Our thing is like put a microphone in front of our faces and let us talk. But all the extra stuff is just that's gone.
Well, I suppose I feel embarrassed about all these shameless plugs now. I think we should hone back.
You're fine. I think that
Ed Parrish is right. We don't have any big fans. That's true.
No. Only fans. What we should do is lead out with one final short story, and that is a remarkable story that we will preface by saying is in no way connected to the wonderful company that is Jameson, and is no way connected to their modern day operations or family members or Pernod Ricard, the large parent company of Jameson. But this is a remarkable story nonetheless.
Sure, but I would say, Barry, if we were going to go into the nether region, I suppose, I also had a story about my locally brewed beer that I might send you a picture for, if that has worked.
Okay. Is this another promo for a t-shirt related item?
No, this is the harp thing I was talking to you about.
Yes.
Before. Oh, I don't know why that's not working for me now.
But should we crack on with the Dublin whiskey thing, and then we'll get into the fire, and then we'll get into that just as soon as you can send that photo and get it sorted.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So I suppose the story. I guess that's close to a link to a picture of it. But in preparation for tonight, I was looking at the history of the Teeling Distillery, which was previously located up in Cooley, which I think you had mentioned previously this evening had made one of the whiskies we were talking about earlier. But they bought over. So one of the big employers, one of the big productions in Dundalk, which is the town that I'm from in North Louth, up until I think the 1990s, was the Great Northern Brewery, which made a lot of beer in that location, and has now been bought over by Teeling's Whiskey to be the Great Northern Distillery, and is now making some of Teeling's whiskey. But in my research for that, I stumbled across a thing that I'd never heard anyone mention before, and is actually, my friend has pointed out only this evening to me, exemplified in the logo for the beer. The man the top brewer who actually came up with this is Harp beer, Harp Lager, which was created in the Great Northern Brewery, and I think I'd be right in saying Barry was like the number one lager in Ireland for, I don't know, up until the 80s or 90s. It was sort of the
domestic kind of beer,
so I would have always known it as being like the beer that was made in my hometown, and it's sort of like it's not so much drunk anymore, but it was the big beer for a long time in Ireland. And when I was looking into the Great Northern Distillery, I saw that it was brewed by a man called Dr. Herman. Let me get this name right. Dr. Herman Munder, who was brought over by the good people at Guinness in 1958 in order to produce this new beer in the Great Northern Distillery. I'd never heard any of this before, but previously he had run a brewery in Cologne in Germany, and before that he'd fought for the Nazis in Poland and Russia.
You make it sound like a sports team. He was fighting for the Nazis before he was transferred over to the Allied side for a price sum of his morality.
In fairness to him, it probably was similar to that, in that I think he was probably 20 at the time. He was conscripted into the Nazi army as opposed to an officer. And, after the fall of the Nazi regime, he went and started a brewery in Cologne. But I just think it is bizarre that I guess I don't know. I think it's commonish knowledge that the CIA and the FBI picked off top German scientists like Werner von Braun to come from Nazi Germany over to America to build rockets after World War II. And apparently the Guinness factory in Ireland was picking off the leftovers to come over and make our top quality brews. And if you look at a picture of the harp, my friend just pointed it out to me, Murner's name is on the thing. It's actually signed on the bottle, which the wild thing to me is not that a German, a Nazi doctor created the formula for harp, and you can see a signature there on the bottle, which has been there for years.
I never knew that.
100 years, never realized that
I've never heard that before. And my first coming across this was this week, and it was in an article from our local paper in the 80s where they're very casually talking about like, although he was born in Germany and fought for his home country in World War II, he'll always be known as the proud Dundalk man who made Harp Lager. I've never heard the Nazi connection to harp, or the fact that his name is literally signed on every can. But there we go. So we've all learned something.
Well, he atoned. He was hopefully spending his latter years atoning for any sins by trying to appease the locals and make them happy with good quality beer.
But it is, I suppose, from a brewing point, an interesting idea that one of Ireland's premier lagers for that period was inspired by a German, like a classic German Dutch beer. That was brought over. So I don't know. It's no different than, I suppose, what was happening in Europe at the time.
And I will add in the small print here that Mr. John Teeling, the owner of Great Northern Distillery, has no knowledge of this story or of the Nazi connections going back to the 1930s and 40s.
Well, this was the 50s and 60s when old Herman was walking around and everyone listen.
We should reference that we've got the Herman Gort story from a previous podcast of the Nazi pilot who parachuted into Ireland, landed, and then just started walking into police stations going, "Where's Dublin? Could you just point me towards Dublin?" And then everyone just did, and no one ever told him, like, should we ask why there's a pilot with a parachute attached to his back? Like, what's going on?
He seems like great crack.
He was the most wanted man in Ireland for a period of about 18 months. He was just hanging out in the hospitable homes of a lot of old Irish women just around the place going, yeah, obviously we want a free world, but also affect the English. So if they, as a mass, yes, we do not want Germany to win, but also at a small point, affect the English.
But that's, I genuinely think, is why I've never heard this harp story before, because I suppose at the time in the 50s and 60s, we're like, well, sure, he was, a Nazi, but I mean, he wasn't British. So we'll just drop this out of the annals of history. And then at some point in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, we thought, maybe we'll just not mention this anymore.
I wonder what became of him. Like, did he end up living amongst the people of Dundalk, just going to mass and having a few pints and became one of the locals?
Well, that's the thing.
I would have imagined that, like most people from Dundalk, he spends most of his time drinking whiskey, walking around, shouting expletives about the English.
No, apparently, the people of Dundalk. It was like how I found about this originally was like a write up in 1986 edition of the Argus, like the local newspaper, glowing reviews of the man. I think he ended up settling in Canada with two of his sons and died there in like 1998 or 1999. So,
history of Canadian club whiskey, and that's where that came.
I like that there's a glowing review of him from the Argus newspaper, perhaps focusing solely on one particular aspect of his life than maybe a comprehensive review.
Much so. I find it. See, that's the thing. Like, I mean, a lot of people would have been conscripted into the army. If I was an 18-year-old man in Germany at the time, I would have ended up fighting for the Nazis. To say that he fought for the Nazis is not a defining feature of who he was as a man or anything. But I do find it hilarious that it's literally never mentioned. It wasn't even thought of as a fact. They were just like, he was just a German man, you know. Like if he had been from Liverpool or Cornwall, it would have been like at great odds. We reluctantly accepted this gift that the British man handed to us, but the fact that he was a literal Nazi soldier, it doesn't even bear mentioning. Apparently,
well, it reminds me of a recent article on the BBC, which is, not. Sometimes we have the phrase in Ireland, that the British are at it again. In reference to their perhaps overlooking of some important aspects of history, or maybe the truth sometimes. But I thought this was a remarkable headline. Let me put this up on the screen recently. So Phil Spector, the music producer, died recently. Yes. And he's well known for a number of horrendous things. But this was the headline that the BBC shared. Murderer Spector has been honoured by the BBC as talented but flawed.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of true. I think that there's a better use of words. If you've a more of expansive use of your vocabulary, I wouldn't have used the second word of that.
I mean, this is kind of what you had alluded to, Jason earlier, but we get in a bit of trouble online for sort of tying these things to. I don't know who said it first, but this, the idea that if Hitler had been. If Hitler's had a stronger connection to Ireland, the headlines in the 40s would have been "Local man invades the Rhineland." We'll claim anybody if they've done anything. We just released an episode recently about a man from outside Newry in a town called Rostrevor who was tied to the recent storming of the Capitol building in Washington, and. I was watching CNN here at the time when it was happening, and they kept making reference to the last time the Capitol had been stormed was in 1814 by the British Army. But in actual fact, it had been a man from Rostrevor in Newry in County Down. But claiming him as Irish is, I think, as funny as claiming Phil Spector as English. When it comes down to it, and I found myself in this sort of, unenviable position of being he was one of the boys, because it's a connection to our history and it's an interesting story to tell as to
he's okay once you get him in on his own. It's a bit different. That's not, you don't want to be talking to him then, but if you get him on his own, he's a reasonable guy.
Yeah. But if it's a man from this island who's done anything abroad, you're he had his ups and downs, but the main thing is he was Irish and he accomplished something. But right. So it is similar in vein to the idea of claiming Phil Spector as a phenomenal vegetarian and leader of Germany, whose brother once valeted in an Irish hotel in Dublin, dies in Germany. Local man found dead in Germany.
Doesn't Tommy Tiernan have a great piece about the Hitler family? Isn't there something about how Hitler's family or his brother or somebody was living in Dublin, and there was a great shame with having that name, and his name was something.
So his brother, Hitler's brother, actually worked as a waiter in the Kevin? Can you tell me the name of the
Shelburne?
Is it the Shelburne? Yeah. Because at the time, the laundry service. I remember seeing David O'Doherty, obviously a far better Irish comedian than myself or Kevin, I'm glad you said maybe Kevin, I remember seeing him a couple of years ago. I was in college up in DCU, talk about this, that Swastika Laundry was the number one laundry service in Dublin for hoteliers or giant businesses, and there was at the time it was the first place in Europe that had electric vans, and they would deliver the laundry service in electric vans in the 1930s, and they would have, it was called Swastika Laundry. And he in the Shelburne, his brother was, he who must not be named, was his brother worked there, and that's a direct link to not only the symbolism and what goes in the armbands, but everything. Also, electric cars in Ireland.
Well, I would say that the lineup of the swastika laundry, which did exist, and Hitler's thing, the timeline doesn't match up. But Alois was working in the Shelburne Hotel, and the swastika laundry was a thing here for a long time.
Yeah, it lasted after World War II. It was still a thing for a while, and then eventually they were like, for marketing purposes, would you not call it Allied laundry?
Well, I had to laugh when he shared that his brother, Hitler's brother, Tommy Tiernan, the comedian, talks about how his brother was working in Germany or working in Dublin, and so embarrassed was he of his name after everything that went down in Germany that he changed his name from Hermann Hitler to Seamus Hitler.
Follow him then at all. But his brother Alois, I think it was his stepbrother, but he married an Irish woman. So there's a bit of lineage there. I think they did actually end up in America, but that's
moving from Hitler onto something equally jarring, but maybe an appropriate night-ending story. What have we next?
Right, yeah. We'll hark back there to what you referenced 15 minutes ago, and we just went off.
Did you harp back because I have an interesting 17-part tangent on the.
Well, it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned the Great Whiskey Fire of Dublin in 1875, because here's a 20-minute tangent about Harp and Nazis.
So, I mean,
the Whiskey Fire. We've done the Whiskey Fire before, right? We're going to do something else.
Moving on.
Well, we can either do the Irish coffee or the paddy, like the.
We won't do either of those. We'll do the Jameson.
Yes. Yeah. So what we talked about earlier on, the origins of Jameson's and Sons distillery in Dublin, and how his granddaughter or great granddaughter had gone on to mother the father of, the contested modern father of radio, Gaeilge Marconi. Gaeilge Marconi's, I would say, second cousin, or the lineage is going back to John Jameson, the original John Jameson. His great grandson was called James Sligo Jameson. That's a picture of John Jameson up there, I suppose.
That's James Jameson.
It's James Jameson. Yes, John. Sligo was a middle name I love, which I think is a very aristocratic thing to start just naming, giving your children the middle names of various counties around Ireland. But Sligo Jameson was the grandson of one of the elites. He was born into a family with a lot of money. He was, I suppose, like a lot of rich people at the time, at a loss as what to do, and looking around and seeing the country that he lived in half despaired in poverty and people dying in the roads, he thought, I won't do anything about this, but I'll make a name for myself. I'll go off on a bit of travel instead, and I'll join an expedition, and I'll be remembered that way. So he joined up with Henry Morton Stanley on his expedition to down the Congo River in 1887, which was the first European expedition to penetrate that far into Africa, and was done under the guise of finding I can't remember his name. It was another explorer who had gone missing there, and it was sponsored by the Belgianese government at the time, under the guise of finding that guy. But in reality, it was actually just to go further down the Congo and get more land for the Belgian government. I should have lobbied my wife in Sligo for a middle name for a son. John, you should have tried harder. Your son could have been called Sligo Ortoko.
His name should read John Maury Technical Knockout.
Maury TKO, yeah. But that was Sligo Jameson. They made it down the Congolese River with this expedition in order to make a name for himself. Prove he wasn't just one of the Jameson boys. Prove himself as.
Is this Apocalypse Now? Is that what you're about to start talking about? This is the Heart of Darkness, the actual original book. This is what we're going on.
So they're on the expedition, and the story comes back to London, and through there spreads out through the news network into like the European news network. It comes from a man called Asad Farhan, who was a Sudanese translator that was with the expedition, that Jameson had paid a member of a Congolese tribe that they'd met 6 white handkerchiefs in order for them to kill a child and eat her so that he could sketch it. And so this is the story that Asad Farhan...
Don't defame the man yet, Kevin. Did he say, did he want them to kill a child so he could, and then eat it so he could paint it, or did he want to kill the child while they ate it?
Well, what he said...
Don't denigrate the name of the great Jameson clan.
I'll give all sides of the story. So what I've just said is what Asad Farhan brought back to the London news networks at the time. You know how the news networks are in London: the Sun, the Mirror, salacious.
They're off the reputation of Reuters. You couldn't trust them.
Reuters at the time was doing top work, but you know it was a bit skeptical. So what Jameson wrote in his own diary at the time was, I set my boy for 6 handkerchiefs, thinking it was all a joke and that they were not in earnest. But then they brought out a 10-year-old girl, and I won't go into the rest of what his quote in his diary is because it's quite graphic, but needless to say, they killed the woman in front of Jameson. And regardless of what Jameson said previously, he decided to make the best of a bad lot, I suppose. And they've just murdered this child in front of him because of the handkerchiefs.
I'd have said the worst of a bad lot, but fair enough.
To draw it. And then when he goes back to his tent, he's got the drawings. He decides, I'll make a few watercolors. I've committed to this. I'm far.
Here now. I'm here.
I've already got all of this excess blood. It's already in the buckets. What else am I going to do with it?
You yourself, listener, in this 2021 woke cancel culture, you can imagine you're only after paying someone in a classic African faux pas to murder a child, and you've drawn it, and you're like, oh gosh, I can understand in the wrong light this could seem like it was a bit of a bad move to make. The story makes it back to London. He himself is still in the Congo at the time, and he unfortunately never gets the chance to clear his good name because he dies a year later in Africa because of some disease he's contracted. But all we have is like the letters that he sent back to his wife about the whole situation, where he clearly stated that he only did it because he paid for it.
Were the words terrible misunderstanding used in the letters back to his wife at all?
No, I think he just said this has totally been taken up the wrong way.
He had said that it was okay because I have a lot of friends who are cannibals.
Yes. Some of my best friends are children who've been eaten by cannibals.
I can see how this looks. ...
Yeah. Who needs that child?
Having the facts shared with you, I can understand how you may think that this is how it transpired, but I can assure you that I only wanted to give the man 6 handkerchiefs in return for the child.
Yes.
Not kill her and draw her.
I would say the last comment had said it's gone now off the screen, but it said cotton or silk, and it's not cotton or silk, it's silky. You just have to turn the bottle a little bit more to see it.
Hey.
And I did mean to say earlier on is that it's unrelated to what you would normally associate silkies with in your region of Ireland, Barry. Unrelated to that whatsoever.
Unrelated, completely unrelated. And I will also say that to finish the Jameson point, this story is remarkably absent from any visitor tour or experience in the Dublin distillery experience or in Middleton. And if it is on display, it's in a very difficult to find place.
Well, see, what you want is Shite Talk Irish History whiskey tours, where we will just walk around towns of Ireland yelling nonsense. Just complete myths and just lies, and we'll never actually get to see the inside of the buildings. That's not inside the tour. That's not part of
We'll also say this is the only reference we'll make to Patrick Call as we steal this line from him and never mention him again. Whiskey heir in misunderstanding loses six handkerchiefs to local chief. Jameson family seeking reparations on bad deal done.
Requesting the return of those 6 handkerchiefs.
Government.
Oh, listen. If shares of Pernod Ricard or sales of Jameson tank tomorrow, we'll know why.
Good.
Much like the GameStop stock market crisis of this week.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to start investing in Irish whiskey.
Here's something for us now when the world opens up. Shite Talk Whiskey Tours. Put it on the list. We have something there now. There we go.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you wouldn't know how to sell a ticket to it. I'd have to sell the tickets for you.
No, we'd be like, buy a ticket to the thing, and then the audience would say, how would you purchase that? And then Jason would be like, I don't know, write a letter to the ombudsman in Ireland, and he might be able to punch you in the right direction.
Write it down onto a frisbee and then feck it over a rainbow.
Open up Internet Explorer and type in https www.yahoo.co.uk
Eurocities.net.
You find us on askjeeves.com. That's we're really big on that.
Log into your Bebo account. Add us, put us in your top 16 friends, and in 6 to 14 weeks you'll get an invitation to one of our shows.
Have we learned anything tonight? I wonder. We've been 3 hours into this. We've told myriad tales of dereliction of duty and whiskey consumption and murder and thigh blowing off. And are we the richer for these stories tonight, or are we the poorer? I wonder.
Well, let's say, Barry, you've probably learned that in advance of the podcast, you had told us, like in the 20 minutes leading up to it, that, I don't expect anyone to be around for 3 hours. And very quickly you realize that you're talking to the wrong men. This is we will go for 6 to 9, and then you'll have to edit down a live stream. You'll have to live edit a podcast as we just start shiting on and rambling. This is the trouble with us.
I think the reputation of it, I think.
I think Unique Leslie Calderon has summed it up correctly in saying that we've learned a load of shite.
Well, Unique bought a T-shirt this week, I believe.
Ah,
yes.
Wow.
I know that because it came up on the screen about an hour ago, and I didn't have time to reference it. But I was like, I will note that for future.
This is a supportive group of people here who will who have recognized that you're close to having not a bite to eat due to your poor business skills, and her finding ways to throw money your way.
Of course. Do you think I want a picture of Colomini up my wall? No, I want a better. I want one of Rembrandt.
Peter O'Toole is what it should.
I want Peter O'Toole, one of Ireland's better actors up there, but I can't afford it. I'm stuck
We have learned not a thing, says Chris, but I think I can speak for the 3 people still hanging around to listen that we have enjoyed the crack. Nevertheless, we have we've wiled away a Friday night.
And is that not the end game at the height of it?
That is all.
Kevin, professional comedian, podcaster. We've talked about this consistently outside of on air. That's the eventual aim. If I have to reference that to you one more time.
I thought whiling away Friday evening was the end game, but so I
never watched the end of a lock-in before, because I don't think I think I introduced this whole thing to you just last week. But here's what happens at the end of a lock-in. Typically, our guests are forced or provoked or prompted by our audience to give a toast or a song. The preference is a song.
Yes,
and so. We will turn to you both and ask, have you got a bar or two of a song individually that you would care to shout out at this time of the night?
If you can go first.
Oh shit! Sorry, I thought you meant you were going to turn to your audience and ask them to sing a song.
Oh, you're the men now that. Well, it is not obligatory, but it's appreciated.
Right. Oh God. Okay. I'll do this because I was listening to I don't know, Jason, if you have anything you want to go on first, we could do that.
No, I'm going to let you go first so that I can one up you.
One up me, for God's sake.
Follow me up to Carlo.
Follow me up to Carlo. Well, I was listening to a very good podcast by Three Castles Dublin during the week about Patrick Kavanagh's time in Dublin. And my father is a Monaghan man, so I've often grown up. I've always grown up with Patrick Kavanagh, overshadowing every artistic work that I've done.
You have always been an incredibly vain, inward-looking artist.
Yes. And I was having an awful lot of fun. After listening to the Three Castles thing, it reminded me of something that I think we edited out of. We ended up doing a 3-part series a while ago about John A. Costello as Taoiseach of Ireland in the 60s and 70s. And one of the things we left out of that was that in between his first stint as Taoiseach and his second stint of Taoiseach, he returned to his passion of law and ended up defending Patrick Kavanagh. This small newspaper called The Leader did a write-up about Kavanagh where it referred to him as like a cantankerous old drunk who hung out in this bar McDade's and spent his time switching between giving out to the people who come to see him and stealing money off them, mooching money off them to buy pints. And they did a big write-up about him, and it was anonymous, it wasn't signed. And Kavanagh took great offense to the idea, and he reckoned that it was written by possibly Brendan Behan, or he had a whole list of other people that he thought had been written by, but he wasn't sure. But he sued the paper anyway for defamation, and it turned out to be the John Costello who defended the Leader newspaper in between his stints as Taoiseach, which would be, because I think Barack Obama was a lawyer before he was the president, so it would be like Barack Obama heading into a law case in between his first stint as president and second stint. Like, that's how famous Costello would have been. And Kavanagh's whole argument was that it was a defamation thing, it was a libel suit, that this was an article that painted him out to be some sort of unreasonable, angry, cantankerous old man. And then he lost that argument. A jury of his peers decided that the article was close enough to the truth to not be libelous. And
he was well known for it. He was an awful
well known for it. But so the whole argument that he got into was that he said he was never friends with Brendan Behan. Costello brought him around to Brendan Behan. He was like, I've never been mates with Behan. And Costello produced a book that he'd given to Behan that he'd signed from Kavanagh, being like, thanks for helping.
Best friend.
My best
buddy, Patrick Kavanagh. And he told that to the jury, and Kavanagh was like, I've never met Brendan Behan. He's only a bastard. But anyway, I was listening to that whole thing during the week, and it put me in mind of On Raglan Road, which is one of Kavanagh's, which I think also happened in McDade's, where Kavanagh came up to Luke O'Kelly and asked him to put a song to the words of this poem. So if I was to do a turn, and I realize this has been a 10-minute intro to you asking me to do a song.
Thanks for the intro.
Have you rolled a cigarette in the meantime, or what's that?
No, I've stolen one. I've stolen one from here beside me, and I wanted to light it, but there's no lighter around me, so I'll have to make two. But anyway,
intro says Michael O'Connor, who has grown grey hair in the time he's waited to hear what this song is.
Michael, I hope that your newborn is ready for the junior cert at this stage. But here we go.
With Kevin's great introduction to that, then I will take over and I will read a verse from Patrick Kavanagh's epic. The different poem.
Well, you read Kavanagh's epic there. Go on.
But it's far shorter and it's probably better.
Is there a song coming?
There's not.
You
that
go.
That was the problem. The fact that I would have to, if I was to do Raglan Road, I'd probably have to put some ornamentation on it. But at the minute, I can just read this.
Hold on a second. How did Kevin just do a big intro to a song and then walk off camera like P. Diddy or something? Or
that is just 100% shite talk.
This is the manifestation of 3 hours of whiskey drinking that we're seeing right here. Is this a song has been promised and then taken away from us? You can't do that to our audience.
Well, all right, I'll give you the song. But it'll be we could do both, I suppose. I'll do Raglan Road, but my favorite Patrick, a Kavanagh song, is a poem that he wrote that's at the end of Terry Flynn.
With the tape.
Yeah, well, this is we're now becoming Tayman, so we'll leap into it. This is a song with the Tayman. This is a poem that was written or read out at my grandfather's funeral, but it's a good poem by Kavanagh that's at the end of Terry Flynn. On an apple-ripe September morn, through the mist-chilled fields I went, with a pitchfork on my shoulder, less for use than for divilment. The tressing mill was set up. I knew in Cassidy's haggard last night, and we owed them a day at the threshing since last year. Oh, it was a delight to be paying bills of laughter and chaffy gossiping kind, with work thrown into the basket, the fancy soaring mind. As I crossed the wooden bridge, I wondered, as I looked into the drain, if ever a summer morning should find me shoveling up eels again. I thought of the wasp's nest back in the bank, and how I got chased one day, leaving the drag and the scrawl knife behind, how I covered my face with hay. The wet leaves of the cocksfoot polished my boots as I went round by the glistening bog holes, lost in unthinking joy. I'll be carrying bags today, I mused. The best job at the mill, with plenty of time to talk of our loves as we waited till the bags to fill. Maybe Mary will call round. And then I came to the haggard gate, and I knew as I entered that I had come through fields that were part of no earthly estate.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful.
That's how you sing in Monaghan. You don't rhyme many words together. You just say a lot of things in quick, sad succession. But
We'll accept that as the spoken word song.
I believe that, Kevin, would be a shout out to our good comedian friend James Catton.
Yes, yeah, James would find. But I think that's one of my favorite. Like, it's a peak Kavanagh poem. I don't know, where he's just talking about the normal day-to-day life of working on the farm and how it transcends into the otherworldliness. But anyway, that's my favorite.
Shite, but now I was going to go Seamus Heaney, but I kind of want to keep. I was going to do digging, and then now I'm right on the fucking Kavanagh track. So it's either to be honest, Barry, you can decide: Inniskeen Road, July evening, or else Epic.
I would say Inniskeen Road.
Right. So the bicycles go by in 2s and 3s. There is a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight. And there's the half-talk code of mysteries and the wink and elbow language of delight. 8:30, and there is not a spot upon a mile of road, no shadow thrown that might turn out a man or woman, not a foot-falling, tapping secrecies of delight of stone. Fuck. I have what every poet hates in spite of all the solemn talk of contemplation. Oh, Alexander Selkirk knew the plight of being king and government and nation. A road, a mile of kingdom. I am king of banks and stone and every blooming thing.
Very good.
Which is probably fairly apt for a bunch of podcasters on their own during COVID drinking whiskey while everyone else is probably, flying in the face of guidelines.
That would bring a tear to any stony Monaghan man's eye.
It would indeed. And I tell you what better way to end a night of Irish culture and history than with a bit of poetry? And I might read a poem myself that I like, a Seamus Heaney poem. That is a lovely.
Oh, feck you, Barry.
Show him your tattoo there.
I know, I've got the digging tattoo right in my fucking bicep.
That's the poem I'll read. That's the one I'm going to read. Digging. That's the one. You lost your chance. You lost your chance.
I did. That's fair though. I'll enjoy you retelling it.
This is one of my favorite Seamus Heaney poems. I love it. It's called Digging by Seamus Heaney. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground, my father digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep, to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mould, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it.
By God.
Sinead, what a night.
Oh,
what a night.
I knew a man called Soggy Pete once. He was my first kiss.
There's all the lads here in the comments looking for the Jack Doyle song called The Contender.
The gorgeous
we're going to have to do a Shite Talk episode of Jack Doyle because I've never heard of him before.
He's a big hit. He's a big hit in these quarters here. Now he wasn't we can easily romanticize a man 30 years or 40 years after his passing, and
sure.
The drink did horrible things to him, and we're not going to say that he lived the most gracious and pious of lives.
Sure.
Unless he was a character, and yes, the song "The Contender" is Christy Moore sings this song, and I think it's is it a Jimmy Crowley or another Cork singer wrote it. I can't remember. I'm 3 hours of whiskey's in. But in any case, yeah, The Contender is a lovely song about the rise and the fall due to drink and boxing in the middle of it all. But I'd say we'll end on that one. But lads, you've been brilliant tonight. This has been an unreal session.
It has. It's been great to be having I'm going to say pints, but it's been pure whiskey. Usually the whiskeys are left until like midnight. Like it's Guinness until midnight, and then you go on to the tipple. And it's like it's very odd to. I've been like 4 p.m. American time, like Texas time. I was like, I don't know what to do here now. I had a beer before the podcast started because I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. I can't be drinking whiskey before the whiskey podcast.
But then we got into the volumes of whiskey, and it was all grand.
Yeah, but all of a sudden I started with the pints of whiskey. Then it was a whole thing. It just led on to us finishing with poetry. We don't do that in our podcast
loved it. Like they've a great show, guys. They've loved it. Loved the crack. Thanks to all for a great lock-in. And look, we practice weekly on how to drink 3 hours worth of whiskey. You've not had the practice yet, have held up remarkably well and vertically despite all, which is a credit.
We've had the practice in other lines. I've also just considered now that it's very funny that like as soon as I started doing a Patrick Cabinet thing, I was like, God, my dad would like this. And my mother had asked me when I told her I was doing this, she'd like to see the stream. The funny thing is that she'd be more put out by the fact that I smoked a cigarette than the fact that I've just spent the last 3 hours drinking whiskey. She'd watch me drink whiskey for 3 hours, and if I smoked a cigarette at the end of it, she'd be like, Jesus Christ, what's he doing to his life? Does he not know at all about
and she'll get 3 good hours before she saw that anyway. If she's a
beautiful voice, you won't be able to podcast anymore.
It cut off there at the end. I don't know what happened. But thank you very much for having us, Barry. It was a delight. It was very, very incredible.
We'll have to make it a more regular occurrence and find some more stories. But it's brilliant, and hopefully we can send some people to the podcast as well along the way and buy some shirts, despite the hurdles they'll have to get over to get the shirts. But hopefully they'll find them.
Listen, I'll convince my girlfriend to go out to the sweatshop, get her into the tie-dye game again.
All right, so listen, I'll sing this song because we've sung it in the past, and it's a bit of crack, and we never say that we're good singers, but we'll sing anyway because we're in the middle of a lock-in.
Oh God,
we'll sing out of this one.
Yeah.
Right. This is for all the requests for the contender. Especially from Richard. Richard O'Kelly loves this song. All right. Jeez, I need a sip of the Silkie to silken the throat.
Oh, yes.
Will we join you? Do you want to give us the lyrics there?
So the challenge is that because of our primitive broadcasting technology, that we have one soundtrack, which means that whomever is talking gets heard. And if three of us try to sing, we get the mangled badger is what we get out the other end.
But are we all looking at the lyrics for Jimmy McCarthy's The Contender?
That's the one. That's the one.
You lead the way, and we'll try and keep in step.
I'm just going to consistently yup and smack the
There you
table.
go. Yeah.
There you go. That'll do. That'll give a good bit of support, and maybe wave a lighter or something, or in the air.
Well, we'll join in the chorus.
All right.
Leave the verse to you.
Brilliant. Here we go. Oh, when I was young and I was in my day, I could steal what woman's heart there was away. Sing and dance unto the dawning, blaze a trail until the morning, long before I was the man you see today. And I was born beneath the star that promised all. I could have lived my life between Cork, Cove and Youghal. But the wheel of fortune took me. From the highest point she shook me. By the bottle live and by the bottle I shall fall. But there in the mirror on the wall, I see the dream is fading. From the contender to the brawl, the ring, the roll, the matador,
the raving.
When I die, I'll die drunk down on the street. You can count me out to 10 in clear defeat. Wrap the starry plough around me. Let the piper's air resound me. There I'll rest until the Lord of Love I'll meet. All together, lads. But there in the mirror on the wall, I see the dream is fading. From the contender to the brawl. The ring, the rose, the
raving.
Oh, when I was young and I was in my day, I could steal what woman's heart there was away. Sing and dance until the dawning, blaze a trail until the morning, long before I was the man you see today. Long before I was the man you see today. Shinny, sláinte, lads.
Sláinte, Barry. Cheers for having us, and thanks for everyone for sticking around and listening to all of it. All the Irish words and etc.
It was brilliant. Brilliant. We'll do it again soon.
I will just say that my lyrics to that last song were completely different than what you were singing.
I was going to say that, yeah, by the last couple of verses, I was like, these are not the lyrics that I have in front of me.
I just quickly Googled it here in front of me. It was an entirely different set of lyrics. But listen,
I was like, I think Barry's tried to undermine us, Kevin. I think that's what it is.
Clearly not rehearsed in any way, as is clearly evidenced from our performance. But
I've clearly not rehearsed in any way.
I don't know what the fuck I'm saying.
Right.
Well, the audience loves it anyway, and you're going to do a Jack Doyle podcast in due course because there's plenty of material there.
I will say, if you have us back, Barry, by the next time we'll have 100% research Jack Doyle and Rob Roy, two of Coves / Queenstown's.
There you go.
Best heroes.
There you And to our audience who've been here all night, you're legends. As I always say, those of you who've stuck around this long are the people who go to funerals to make sure that the person's dead. And your own particular brand of enjoyment. But I enjoy your presence. So thanks so much for sticking around. So until next Friday.
In the parish centre afterwards.
And the cakes afterwards. So sláinte to everyone who's joined in. And we'll end the broadcast now.